I died playing Mount and Blade late at night. Just dropped dead from staying up too long. Next thing I knew, I woke up in someone else's body. A guy with a pockmarked face was shaking me, yelling, "Simon! Simon! Wake up!" There was a messenger looking for me. I was confused, still getting my bearings, when I noticed a blonde woman lying next to me under a linen blanket. The guys around me pulled me up, threw some clothes on me, and dragged me outside the tent. The messenger bowed and called me Sir Simon Holland. That shocked everyone, including the soldiers holding me up. Turns out, my uncle, well, Simon's uncle, a knight named Jolin, died protecting some Marquis 3 months ago. The Marquis rewarded Jolin's loyalty by getting the king to grant him the title of Baron. But Jolin's only son died in battle 2 weeks ago with no children. So the title and the land fell to me. Simon, the eldest nephew, a free commoner who raised horses. The messenger asked me to come meet the Marquis. I agreed, brought along 5 guys from my hometown, and climbed into a waiting carriage. That's when things got really interesting. My cheat code arrived. Right before my eyes, I saw the Mount and Blade interface, the exact save file I'd been playing when I died. I was a Baron in that game too. I tested the inventory, and I could actually pull things out into the real world. I grabbed a red apple from thin air, bit into it, sweet and real. The skill system had 16 abilities, things like Iron Flesh, Power Strike, Athletics, Riding, Surgery, Engineering, Leadership, and more. Simon's stats were terrible, almost all zeros. His weapon skills were low too, with polearms being his best at 49. I had 5 upgrade points, so I put 1 into Iron Flesh right away. Heat rushed through my body. My muscles and bones ached and burned for about 15 minutes, then it passed. I felt genuinely stronger afterward. I also checked my troop roster. I had 5 named companions and a beat-up army, a handful of heavy cavalry, some hired light cavalry, infantry, militia, and archers, most of them wounded. Whatever battle Simon fought before he died, it nearly wiped him out. But none of that mattered. I had a title, I had land waiting for me, and I had the game system working in real life. I decided right then, I'm Simon now, and I'm going to make this work. While riding in the carriage, I checked my inventory and spotted 6,783 dinars in gold. I pulled one out. A shiny gold coin appeared in my hand. It was lighter than the local currency called gold eagles, worth about half. So I had roughly 3,000 gold eagles total. Still a fortune here. 1 gold eagle equals 20 silver deer, and a loaf of bread costs just 2 copper stars. After about an hour of bumpy riding, we arrived at the Marquis' camp in a green valley surrounded by mountains. This camp was much better than the militia one. Proper log fences, guard towers every 100 meters, everything neat and organized. The smell inside was awful though, horse and human waste everywhere. But deeper in, it got cleaner. The Marquis' tent was the biggest one, gray-white with red decorations and a double-headed eagle, the royal emblem. I went in alone. Marquis Val was a big, tough-looking middle-aged man in red armor, polishing a short sword that glowed faint icy blue. I bowed as best I could, copying noble manners from Simon's memories. It was clumsy, but I tried. He told me Uncle Jolin served as his personal guard for 17 years and died saving him during the Battle of West Wind Pass. Jolin's son Sal had chosen Holland as the family surname before he died too. Now everything fell to me. The Marquis handed me a sheepskin map and a sealed letter, told me to take Jolin and Sal's belongings and go to Golden Eagle City to receive my official title from the king. He also suggested hiring some reliable mercenaries. A guard led me to a gray tent nearby. Inside were 2 urns of ashes and 2 sets of battered armor, 1 plate and chain, 1 brigandine with chain lining. Both were smashed up and bloodstained. There was also a 2-handed greatsword and a war hammer, all covered in scratches. These men died hard. I found a money pouch full of coins and a small sheepskin book stained with blood. The first page read, Rating Fire Night Breathing Method. My heart jumped. This was a real treasure. By law, only nobles could learn such techniques. Anyone else caught with it would be executed. I immediately stored it in my game inventory. I grabbed the urns and the bag, then asked the guard to help carry the armor to the camp gate. My 5 hometown buddies were waiting in the grass. I told them we grew up together and I wouldn't forget them if I made it big. They smiled but grew more respectful. The quick-thinking ones rushed to pick up the armor and weapons without being asked. For them, following a new baron was a rare chance to climb up in the world. If things went well, they might even become landed knights someday. I looked back at the camp one last time and thought, new identity, new life. Time to make something of it. Right as we were chatting, Hilter's stomach growled loud, then mine joined in. We hadn't eaten since morning, and it was already noon. I led everyone toward the merchant camp a few hundred meters west of the Marquis camp. It was bigger and cleaner than the military camp, no terrible smell at all. Soldiers in leather and metal armor wandered around in groups. We spotted a tavern called the Roaring Tavern, just a bunch of tables and chairs set up outdoors on cleared ground. The place was busy, rough soldiers laughing and shouting everywhere, a traveling poet singing upbeat songs. Some big yellow-haired men had half-dressed women sitting on their laps, hands wandering freely. My 5 buddies couldn't stop staring. They were all barely adults, and it showed, total greenhorns. A waiter came over and I ordered big. 6 loaves of black bread, 6 servings of roast mutton, 6 mutton soups, a roast chicken, berries, cheese, and butter. The waiter glanced at the fine 2-handed iron sword by our feet and relaxed. He'd been worried we couldn't pay. Food came after half an hour. It looked decent. The roast meat was only seasoned with salt, but the natural flavor was good enough. The black bread, though, that thing was basically a brick. I tried a piece and nearly cracked a tooth. There were tiny pebbles and bits of straw baked inside. Hilter and the boys ate everything, bread and all. Growing boys eat like animals. The bill came to 3 silver sheep coins. I carefully pulled the money from the inherited coin pouch, hiding it with my sleeve. I placed the coins directly in the waiter's hand instead of dropping them on the table. Didn't want the clinking sound drawing attention. That pouch was full of gold and silver, and in a place like this, that's dangerous. While eating, I thought hard about my situation. I was the last heir of the Holland family. If I died, the barony would be taken back, and plenty of old noble families were probably eyeing that land already. That's why the Marquis told me to hire mercenaries. Suddenly, a table in the middle of the tavern flipped over, soup flying everywhere. Some men were fighting over a woman, swords drawn. I didn't want any part of that. Let's go, I said, and all 6 of us grabbed our gear and left fast. No dramatic confrontation, thankfully. Outside, Hilter asked if we were going back to our home village. Another guy said obviously we were heading to my new territory. A street woman tried to lure the boys inside somewhere, and they all stared with wide eyes. I pulled them away. We had no money to waste, and I needed to think. I found a quiet hillside, sat on a flat rock, and pretended to dig through the cloth bag while actually pulling the sheepskin map from my game inventory. It showed the land called West Seas in clear detail. I asked the guys if they'd heard of it, but they were all half illiterate and started arguing without knowing anything useful. Then a sweet, charming voice called out from somewhere. "Excuse me, do you know where I can find Lord Simon?" A woman's voice had called out looking for me. She was about average height, wheat-colored skin, wearing a brown dress cinched tight at the waist. Her name was Millen, and she said her sister was Sal's fiancé. Her father was a merchant. That surprised me. Why would a newly made noble like Sal get engaged to a merchant's daughter instead of finding another noble family? But I agreed to meet the father. Their group wasn't far away, maybe 100 meters. They had about a dozen mounted guards in serious gear, chainmail under brigandine armor, carrying cavalry lances. These looked like elite soldiers. The father rode over, a big, powerful man named Kyle. He owned something called the Windroom Trading Company and a mercenary group called the Warspear Company. Behind him came a woman in a fine brown cloak. She was tall, with a stunning figure and pale, beautiful face under her hood. Kyle got straight to business. Sal had signed a marriage contract with his daughter Waynies. He wanted me to take Sal's place and marry her. I kept my face calm and told him the contract died with Sal. The kingdom had no law about inheriting marriage agreements. He didn't flinch. Instead, he laid out my situation plainly. I was in real danger. No castle, no army, no allies. If I died, the land goes back to the crown, and plenty of southern nobles were hungry for it, like vampires craving blood. I opened the map and looked at my territory, Valor Domain. It was huge, over 1,000 square kilometers. Way bigger than a normal barony. But then Kyle explained the catch. The entire West Seas region was newly conquered wilderness. No castles existed anywhere. Everything needed building from nothing. He broke down the costs. A decent slave farmer cost 5 silver deer. Oxen cost 5 silver deer each. A proper small castle would run at least 3,000 gold eagles. Developing raw wilderness like this required massive money. It clicked. Sal wasn't stupid. Our family had no connections, no power base, just one person left. Marrying into high nobility risked getting swallowed up. A rich merchant's daughter was actually the smart move. Get the money, develop the land, grow the family, then worry about political marriages generations later. I asked Kyle directly what he'd give me. His offer, 3,000 gold eagles plus a 100-man slave soldier unit. 50 light infantry, 20 spearmen, 30 archers, all equipped at his expense. Plus his mercenary company would personally escort me to Eagle City for my title ceremony. I called it a legion in my head and almost laughed. 100 men is no legion. But for a baron starting from nothing, it was actually significant. I told him I'd think about it and give my answer by evening. He immediately raised it to 4,000 gold eagles and told me to consider carefully. I could tell he was getting frustrated. He expected me to jump at this deal, but I wasn't biting that easily. After Kylo left, I told Hilter and the guys I needed to take a leak, then walked into the nearby woods alone. Once I was hidden in the thick trees, I tried something, pulling soldiers out of my troop roster. It actually worked. A ripple appeared in the air a few meters away and spat out a big armored man. It was Ailey, my top knight from the game, wearing heavy scale armor over chainmail and holding a huge two-handed sword. He stumbled around dizzy for a moment, then knelt to steady himself. He recognized me as his lord, but couldn't remember my name or much else, just basic things and his own name. I told him I was Simon Holland, his baron, and made up a believable story about what happened. Then I released all 44 unwounded soldiers at once. Ripples appeared everywhere, and suddenly the forest was full of men and 8 war horses. They were all dizzy at first, but recovered fast. Every one of them had lost their memories except for basics and their names. Ailey explained the situation to them. They were Simon Holland's personal soldiers, and I was about to become a baron. They accepted it. Then Ailey shouted a warning. Someone was watching us. He charged into the brush like an angry bear, sword raised. Archers loosed arrows, and one hit the target. A woman screamed. Ailey dragged her back. She was young and attractive, and I recognized her immediately. The blonde woman from the tent when I first woke up. The one who'd been in bed with Simon. Looking back at those memories now, I understood what really happened. She hadn't just seduced him. She'd drained him dry and killed him. "Are you a witch?" I asked, pressing a sword against her throat. She panicked and denied it. I didn't hesitate. I shoved the blade through her neck. Blood gushed everywhere. My stomach turned and my hair stood on end, but I held it together and jumped back. She grabbed her throat, twitched, and died. Then something horrifying happened. Her body aged rapidly right before our eyes. The 18-year-old girl turned into a woman in her 40s, her skin going bluish-green like something out of a nightmare. Even my hardened soldiers backed away scared. I told everyone to calm down, ordered them to burn the body, and noticed a cloth bag on her waist. Inside were some black bread, a coin purse, wild berries, a small wooden saw, and a leather-bound book. It was palm-sized, covered in writing I couldn't read, with detailed illustrations inside. It looked like a spell book, though the pictures were disturbing, clearly dark magic. I tucked it into my game inventory. Then came the real shock. A piercing, insane scream ripped through the air so loud my ears went numb. I spun around, the dead which had sat back up. Her eyes locked onto me, full of hate. Then she sprang up and scuttled into the deep forest on all fours like a spider, faster than a rabbit. She was gone in 4 or 5 seconds. My soldiers were shaking. Ailey looked at me, unsure what to do. "Let's get out of these woods first," I said. "We'll find someone who knows what that thing was." That scream had magic in it. Chasing her into unfamiliar dense forest would be stupid. We headed for the tree line. We came out of the woods and met up with Hilter and the boys. They stared wide-eyed at the 40-plus armed soldiers behind me. Hilter couldn't figure out how I'd gone to pee and come back with an army. And they did look impressive. Ailey and Sarit were the heavy hitters, one leading cavalry, one handling infantry, both in full heavy armor. The rest were well-equipped too. Heavy infantry, light infantry, militia, longbowmen, short bowmen, and cavalry. Even the light infantry had iron chain mail and helmets. This was a royal-grade fighting force. I led everyone to the merchant camp to buy supplies. With this many soldiers, I felt a lot safer walking around. First stop was the horse market. I bought 10 cargo wagons and 60 draft horses, haggling the price down to 21 gold eagles with Mad's help. I inspected every horse myself. Simon's old horse breeding knowledge came in handy. Then I spotted a beautiful brown warhorse named Ailey, shoulder height of 171, glossy coat, 5 years old and in his prime. I talked the merchant down to 23 gold eagles. I also picked up a black medium warhorse for 12 gold eagles to give to Ailey the knight. A knight needs a horse. The total bill for horses, wagons, and saddles came to over 60 gold eagles. That ate up most of the inherited money. Next I bought grain, filling all 10 wagons with 800 gin each. 5 wagons of rye, 3 of barley, 1 of wheat, and 1 of black beans. Rye tasted awful, but was cheap and filling. Wheat was delicious, but cost 10 times more. Only nobles ate it. The black beans were mostly for the warhorses. Draft horses could just eat grass along the road. I also checked out a slave market. They mostly sold beastmen, dog-headed creatures about 1.50 m to 60 tall. Good for mining, not much else. I looked around hoping to find some beast-eared girls, but had no luck, so I moved on disappointed. After buying tents and basic supplies, we left the merchant camp. Kylo came over immediately, looking stunned at my new troops. I casually introduced everyone. Ailey and Sarit as my honored knights, Mad as my quartermaster, Yaman as my steward, Kalen as my field doctor. Kylo's jaw nearly dropped. He couldn't understand how a commoner like me had found followers so quickly and already handed out knight titles. This clearly wasn't part of his plan. I told him I'd accept the marriage deal, but I wanted to see his daughter first. If she was ugly, I'd want a different one. Did he have more than one daughter? He stammered a bit, then said I'd actually already seen her. The woman in the fine brown cloak stepped forward and curtsied gracefully. Lord Simon, I am Waynes, she said in a sweet, respectful voice, her cheeks turning pink. She was the tall one with the stunning figure and beautiful pale face I'd noticed earlier. Very nice indeed. I was honestly pleased with Waynes. She was beautiful and carried herself like a noble woman. Kylo had raised her well. I asked bluntly if she was still a virgin. He swore she was, since Sal had rushed off to war right after signing the marriage contract. I agreed to marry her. She blushed and lowered her head shyly, which made me smile. Kylo laid out the full deal. His mercenary company would escort me to Eagle City. We'd hold the wedding there before the gods. Then he'd give me 4,000 gold eagles for building up my territory, plus the 100-man slave soldier unit. Before leaving, I told him about the witch incident in the woods, every detail. His face turned serious. He said she'd practiced corrupted dark magic, and since she came back from the dead, she'd become a dark creature, probably a spider woman. He said they're not too hard to kill right after transforming, just cut off the head. But if she escaped into the forest, she'd come back for revenge. Then he casually mentioned that Waynes was a trained mage. That made my heart skip. After what just happened with the witch, hearing my future wife was a magic user set off alarm bells. In this world, the line between a female mage and a witch wasn't always clear. Mages used normal magic with no side effects. Witches used dark arts that came with a price. I kept my concerns hidden behind a smile. We set off south. My troops and Kylo's combined into one column of over 200 people. His war spear mercenaries were well equipped. About 70 or 80 riders in iron armor, half on proper warhorses, the rest on travel horses. I rode my new brown warhorse. He was well-tempered, just snorted once and settled down. After a few hours we'd covered about 30 li and made camp on flat ground with thin vegetation. Along the way, I pumped Kylo for information and learned a tremendous amount about this world. This was the Eagle Kingdom, sitting in the northeast of a continent called Slore. Ocean to the east, the sighing wasteland to the north, thorny swamp to the south, and hot dry desert to the west with more ocean beyond. West Seas was carved from the southwestern edge of the sighing wasteland, which wasn't actually barren at all. It was full of plains, grasslands, forests, rolling hills, and snow-capped mountains. It was called Wasteland, only because beastmen and other races lived there before. Marquis Val had just conquered it from them. The beastmen took heavy losses and wouldn't attack again for 3 to 5 years, giving us time to develop. I also learned how supernatural power worked here. It was a low-magic world with 3 main combat classes: knights, mages, and warriors. Knights were strongest, mages second, warriors last. Strength was measured simply by how much weight you could lift. Both warriors and knights started at the same level, 200 Jin for entry rank. They shared the same tiers up through advanced level: entry, low, mid, high. But after that, knights pulled far ahead. A bronze warrior could lift 800 Jin. A bronze knight could lift 1500. Silver warriors topped out at 1200, while silver knights hit 2000. Gold knights reached 3000 Jin. Knights also had special combat techniques that looked like magic, and they lived much longer. A bronze knight could reach 150 years old. Gold knights lived past 200, sometimes 300. Warriors only lived to 60 or 70. The catch: knight training methods, called breathing techniques, were restricted to nobility by law. Commoners caught practicing them faced execution. Warriors used a different system called body tempering, which anyone could learn. That breathing technique book I'd found in Uncle Jolan's belongings suddenly felt even more precious. Kylo also told me about mages. They were the mysterious power in this world, with several organizations, the most famous being Winterfort Mage Academy, the Royal Mage Corps, and the Nature's Hand Mage Association. Magic depended heavily on natural talent. Even a king couldn't learn it without the gift. Mages had 7 ranks: beginner, apprentice, entry, mid, high, mastery, and grand master. Nature's Hand called the top 2 ranks gray robe and white robe mages. But even a grand master's biggest fireball was only about as powerful as a rocket launcher. Strong, but not unstoppable, 30 to 50 high-level warriors could still overwhelm one. Bottom line, numbers still mattered most in this world. I needed to build up my forces. As evening came, Kylo left to set up night defenses and sent Waynies to keep me company. We chatted comfortably and got to know each other a bit. I showed her the witch's book. She examined it carefully and said it was a book of corruption, carrying dark magic. The cover read, Demon's Touch, a faction she'd never heard of. She started translating the first page, then suddenly turned bright red. I immediately guessed. That first spell was exactly what the witch had used to drain the original Simon to death. She said the book was worth about 1,000 gold eagles on the black market, but getting caught with it meant hanging for commoners and losing a rank of nobility for nobles. She suggested destroying it. I pretended to agree but secretly stored it in my inventory. Then I asked if she could teach me magic. She said she could, but I might not have the talent for it. She practiced something called the Earth Meditation Method, and she gave me the scroll since she'd already memorized it. The writing was in magical script I couldn't read, same type as the dark book. She patiently started teaching me the magical alphabet until it got dark. Kalen came to tell us dinner was ready. Kylo had provided the meal: roast lamb chops, white bread, jam, cheese, and vegetable soup. I cut a big piece of bread, spread cheese on it, and offered it to Waynies first. We ate quietly and politely together. I tried hinting about spending the night together, but she clearly wasn't that kind of girl. This world wasn't like what I imagined about Western culture: different world, different customs. Back in my tent, I worked on my upgrade points. I put another point into Iron Flesh. After 15 minutes of body aching, I felt much stronger, roughly able to lift 300 Jin now, equal to a low-level warrior. 2 Iron Flesh points seemed to add about 100 Jin of strength each. Then I put 1 point into scouting. My eyes felt warm for about 10 minutes. The skill description appeared. If I stared at any target within 3 meters for 5 seconds, I could sense their strength level compared to mine. Green meant safe, red meant dangerous, darker red meant bigger threat. Plus, if someone had hostile intentions toward me, I'd see dark energy around them, scaling with how much they wanted to hurt me. Very useful. Tomorrow I'd test it on Waynies and Kylo. I tried putting my last 2 points into Battle Fury and Magic, but they wouldn't activate. The system explained I needed to actually practice a breathing technique and a meditation method first, at least run through the process once. I had both the Rating Fire breathing technique and the Earth meditation scroll, so once I could read the magical writing, I should qualify. I lay down thinking about how to develop my territory and recruit people. I was just drifting off to sleep when a piercing shriek tore through the night. I jolted awake and grabbed a steel sword from my inventory, holding it ready in front of me. A shriek woke me up. My guard said something was happening in the wilderness to the east. I figured it was the Spider-Woman, the witch I'd killed who came back to life. I checked my troops in the roster. Most had full loyalty at 100, though some militia were in the 90s. Each soldier also had their own upgrade points I could assign. I ordered everyone to stay close and guard my tent. I couldn't afford to lose anyone. Ailey and Sarit were my strongest fighters. Ailey had Iron Flesh at 10, making him Silver Warrior level. Sarit was at 8, Bronze level. Both were skilled with swords and bows, easily able to handle 10 or 20 regular soldiers. I pulled a full set of scale and chain armor from my inventory, helmet with chain face guard, bracers, leg guards, armored boots. My storage had a lot of useful stuff: apples, wheat, honey, iron ingots, beef, all staying fresh inside. Plus several sets of good armor, steel swords, an imperial longbow, pole arms, and even 2 war horses. No plate armor though, which was the top-tier stuff in this world. 2 soldiers helped me suit up. The armor was heavy but bearable with my upgraded Iron Flesh. I wasn't planning to fight the Spider-Woman, just wanted better protection than leather. Outside, I learned Kylo had gone chasing the creature with his men, and Waynes went too. That surprised me. My fiancé had guts. I waited and studied my system. I discovered an experience bar at the top of the interface, currently at level 0 with about 200 out of 1,000 points. You could earn experience from killing enemies, chopping wood, farming, managing territory, even sleeping, though that gave very little. About half an hour later, a bright white flash lit up the distant forest for several seconds. Then Kylo and Waynes returned. She was carrying a slender staff about her height. Kylo reported the Spider-Woman was evolving fast, already had 8 limbs, and they'd failed to kill her. I ordered bonfires lit around the camp perimeter and put a third of the men on watch duty. Everyone else went to sleep. I kept my heavy armor on, uncomfortable, but safer. Then the screaming started again. Every 30 minutes or so, another piercing shriek from the forest. The sound made my heart race. It had some kind of magical effect. The Spider-Woman's plan was obvious: keep us awake all night. After being jolted awake twice more, I'd had enough. I got up, grabbed my steel sword, and went to find Sarit on watch. He confirmed the creature kept approaching but wouldn't enter camp. It seemed afraid of fire. I could make out its outline in the distance, about 3 meters tall, moving like a long-legged spider. I went back to my tent and pulled out the Imperial longbow and a bag of armor-piercing arrows from my inventory. I handed them to Sarit. His archery skill was at 86, expert level. He knocked an arrow, took half a breath to aim at the distant shape, and fired. A horrible hiss scream confirmed the hit. The Spider-Woman scuttled away into the darkness. I gave Sarit the bow and arrows to keep, then went back to my tent. She probably wouldn't be back tonight. I slept deeply and woke feeling rested. I stored the longbow and arrows back in my inventory, strapped a steel sword to my waist, and stepped out. Mad, my quartermaster, was guarding the tent. He looked like a support guy, but he had 5 points in Iron Flesh, making him a high-level warrior, plus great archery and trading skills. I ran into Waynes during my morning walk. I used my scouting skill on her, staring for about 8 seconds. She glowed faintly red, stronger than me, but there was no black fog. She had no hostile intentions. That was a relief. I asked about the white flash from last night. She said it was a light spell, good for illumination and slightly threatening to dark creatures. I complimented her bravery, and she smiled sweetly. Breakfast was simple: vegetable soup, white bread with butter and cheese. To me it was basic, but soldiers stared enviously as it was carried past. White bread cost 10 times more than black bread. Even well-off commoners treated it as a special treat for children. We packed up and headed out. No proper roads existed in West Seas yet, so we followed the army's earlier route, which had been roughly cleared. Being a noble was nice. I didn't have to lift a finger for any of the work. I used scouting on Kylo too. Deep red, meaning he was much stronger than me, but no black fog. Trustworthy enough. After 2 hours, hoofbeats came from behind. A group of about 20 to 30 light cavalry caught up, some family's men. Their leader, a brown-haired man in plate-and-chain armor, called out asking for Sir Simon's convoy. Kylo tensed up immediately and demanded to know who they were. The man identified himself as Knight Doral from the Andrew family of Haystack City. He said their heir, Jeffrey Andrew, wanted to speak with me. I waited. Soon a caravan of 100 people appeared, and 7 or 8 fully armored knights galloped over. Jeffrey greeted me politely enough, but arrogance was written all over his face. He said his father, Viscount Bird Andrew, wanted to discuss an alliance between our families, specifically a marriage. He handed over a sealed letter on fine sheepskin parchment. I checked it carefully before opening. I was wearing armored gloves, so even poison wouldn't be an issue. The letter's terms were terrible. The Viscount was clearly trying to grab my land cheaply. Probably planned to marry me off, and then have me killed to claim the territory. But I kept my face perfectly calm and told Jeffrey I'd think it over and give him an answer once we reached Eagle City. He wasn't happy, but couldn't argue since I hadn't refused outright. The moment they left, Kylo rushed over looking worried. Nobles outranked merchants, and a Viscount's proposal was intimidating. I quickly reassured him. I was a man of my word. I only stalled to avoid trouble on the road. I'd reject them properly in Eagle City. He relaxed, but I could see a new wariness in his eyes. He was realizing this 16-year-old wasn't as simple as he'd assumed. We traveled the rest of the day and made camp at dusk. While everyone worked setting up camp, I spent time with Waynies, partly flirting, partly learning magic. During the midday break, I'd been studying the raiding fire-breathing technique on my own. Meals were modest. Soldiers got water-soaked black bread for lunch, while I had white bread with cheese and some berries. Dinner was better. We shared a boiled chicken along with the usual. As the sun set and the sky turned into a beautiful painting of blue and distant mountains, animal screams erupted from the nearby forest. The soldiers jumped into action, herding horses to the center of camp and circling empty wagons around the perimeter like a fence. "Jackal men," a sentry shouted. A mob of humanoid creatures burst from the trees. They were human-sized, some even bigger, with faces like a mix of wolf and fox, covered in yellowish-brown fur. Most wore no armor. A few had leather, and only a handful had chainmail. Their weapons were a mess, mostly clubs, some swords and spears. I wasn't worried at all. These were clearly disorganized rabble. Kylo took charge, lining up archers first. The first volley dropped over a dozen of the fastest ones. The rest kept charging fearlessly. Kylo had arranged his mercenaries in 3 formations behind the wagon line, front row holding big wooden shields with spears resting in notches. When the jackal men hit the wagons, the order came. Thrust. Spears punched through flesh. More fell. The survivors clawed uselessly at the shields while archers kept firing from atop the wagons. It was over quickly. All but 7 or 8 were killed. Those last few whimpered like beaten dogs and ran back into the forest. I went to the edge to look at the carnage. The blood smell made me slightly nauseous. Several jackal men were still alive, groaning on the ground. Ailey offered to finish them, but I said no, I needed to get used to this. I drew my steel sword and cut off the first one's head. Blood poured out everywhere. My stomach lurched, but I held it together. Then I killed the rest one by one. Kylo asked how it felt. "Not bad," I grinned, then handed my sword to Sarit to clean. That night in my tent, just as I drifted off, the Spider-Woman was back, right on schedule. I rolled over, my armor clanking, plugged my ears, and went back to sleep. I was young and slept like a rock. Her screaming couldn't keep me up anymore. Next morning, Ailey reported that Sarit had scared her off with one arrow again, but she'd kept howling from the forest until near dawn. This couldn't go on. Ailey suggested taking 10 men into the forest at night with Kylo's help to hunt her down. She looked scary but wasn't invincible. I told him we'd discuss it after breakfast. Breakfast was bland but heavily salted. I learned this world had a whole hierarchy of salt: snow salt at the top, white and fine like powder, then golden salt with a slight yellow tint and mild bitterness, which most minor nobles used. Below that was yellow salt, rough and quite bitter. The worst were sea salt and black salt, barely edible, fed to slaves. Kylo provided me golden salt. Before we set off, riders from several families delivered letters, all marriage proposals. One was from Earl Wendelson of Storm City, a windy coastal territory with poor farmland but good fishing and salt production. His offer: 1,000 gold eagles, 1,000 slaves, 200 lone soldiers, and a salt trading permit. Not bad, but I couldn't risk marrying into a powerful noble family while I was the last member of mine. None of the offers beat Kyle's 4,000 gold eagles anyway. We traveled until midday across open plains, then stopped. I called Kyle over to discuss the Spider-Woman problem. He admitted it was serious. Soldiers were losing sleep every night. If this went on for a month, it would cripple us. The problem wasn't that she was tough to kill, but that she was too fast and only came out at night in the forest where we couldn't chase her. My plan was simple: dig deep pits on the open plain near the forest edge and use myself as bait. When she charged, she'd fall in, and we'd finish her with spears. Kyle protested. Too dangerous, but I convinced him. Most of the men started digging 4-meter-deep traps, while others prepared a big dinner as a reward. Meanwhile, I sat in a wagon studying the raiding fire-breathing technique. It was written in common script with body diagrams, so I could read it all. The method worked best if started at age 6 to 8, with the goal of awakening a life seed and producing battle aura by 16. Before Bronze Knight level, battle aura only circulated inside the body to boost physical ability. After Bronze, you could release it externally as combat techniques. The book included one attack skill called Raiding Fire Slash. I mentally rehearsed the breathing method, then went to my tent and practiced for 2 hours. When I checked my interface, the Battle Fury option was now unlockable. I immediately spent 1 upgrade point on it. Heat surged through my body and gathered at my left chest. Something was born inside me, spreading through every limb with each heartbeat. I understood instantly. This was the life seed forming. I was now a real knight. Even among nobles, true knights weren't that common. There's a saying in this kingdom: a knight is always a noble, but a noble isn't always a knight. I tested my strength outside, about 100 genes stronger, matching a mid-level warrior. Still weak, since Simon's body had been drained by the witch. I put my last upgrade point into Battle Fury 2. After another wave of heat, I was now at high warrior level. Both paths, Iron Flesh and Battle Fury, stacked together, each point adding roughly 100 gene of lifting strength. Many noble knights trained both paths simultaneously, though usually focusing on the knight path. Some even added magic, but that kind of triple talent was extremely rare. With high warrior strength, I felt much more confident about tonight's Spider-Woman hunt. My experience bar was nearly halfway full too. I probably hit level 2 by the time we reached Eagle City. I planned to put those points into magic and resistance, which would help against poison, disease, and even elemental damage like fire, ice, and lightning. Nobles loved poisoning each other, so better safe than sorry. As evening approached, the clouds thickened. It looked like rain was coming. After sunset, wind picked up and a light rain started falling. The 3 big trap pits were ready, 4 meters deep with sharpened wooden stakes at the bottom, covered with branches and grass for camouflage. Trenches were dug on both sides for Kyle's mercenaries to hide in. I sat by a bonfire at the center behind the 3 pits with Ailey, Sarit, 2 heavy infantry, and Waynies. She insisted on coming along. As an entry-level mage, she could help. We chatted quietly while the soldiers watched the dark forest with drawn swords. Then the screaming started, but it wasn't just the Spider-Woman. A dozen shriveled figures burst from the trees. The front ones tumbled straight into the pits. "Ghouls!" Waynies shouted. My heart jumped. I drew my sword. Waynies raised her staff, chanted something short, and a ball of white light the size of a lychee shot up and hovered in the air, lighting everything up like daylight for dozens of meters around. The ghouls flinched from the light. Sarit started shooting. His first arrow knocked one down, but it got back up. Waynies told us to aim for the head. Sarit's next arrow punched right through a ghoul's skull, and it stayed down for good. I ordered a retreat to camp. 7 or 8 ghouls were stuck in the pits, but 4 or 5 slipped through the gaps. They carried rusty weapons and looked terrifying. These were reanimated jackalmen corpses. They moved fast, like sprinters, but their actual fighting ability was poor. Sarit and the 2 heavy infantry cut them all down easily. Then came the real shriek. The Spider-Woman charged out of the forest on her long legs. I turned and ran for camp. Kyle's men rushed forward to meet her. Suddenly, I heard her cry change. She'd fallen into the 3rd pit. The ghouls had triggered 2 traps, but the northern one stayed hidden. She charged right over it and dropped in. She might have been cunning enough to send ghouls first, but as a monster, her intelligence wasn't great. Kyle and his men surrounded the pit and stabbed down with long spears relentlessly. By the time I walked over with a spear of my own, she was full of holes and leaking green blood, barely alive. I shouted for everyone to stop. They looked at me, confused. I aimed my spear at her head and thrust down hard. I felt it sink into flesh. I stabbed again and again. After about 15 strikes, she finally stopped twitching. A little chime rang in my ear. I checked my interface. Level up. 1 new upgrade point. I asked if the body was worth anything. Wayne said certain Spider-Woman parts were useful to alchemists. Claws, blood, and bone ash. Worth at least 200 gold coins. I put her in charge of harvesting the materials and told her my soldiers would help however she needed. Back at camp, I set up the night watch rotation and went straight to bed. Sarit stayed behind to help Wayne's process the corpse. I didn't need to worry about any of the details anymore. Everyone treated me with respect, handled the work, and kept things running. The food was still nothing special, but life was definitely getting better. I fell asleep dreaming about building my territory. It rained during the night, but the waterproof tent kept me dry. I woke stiff from sleeping in armor again, strapped on my sword, and went out. Checking my troop roster, I noticed something worrying. Yaman's loyalty had dropped from 100 to 99, and over a dozen others had dipped too. Maybe it was the hard travel or the bad food. These weren't game characters anymore. They were real people with real feelings. I decided to spend my new upgrade point on leadership instead of saving it. The troop capacity jumped from 281 to 581, and the skill would now boost everyone's loyalty by 1 point per week, as long as they weren't secretly plotting against me. Breakfast couldn't come fast enough. I wolfed down 3 bowls of grain porridge, a 2-gene white bread loaf, and half a block of cheese, still wanting more. My appetite had grown massively since upgrading my body. The soldiers loved butter most. High calories, kept you full. Wayne's brought me the processed Spider-Woman materials, claws, blood, and bone ash, and offered to sell them through her father's Windroom trading company for 210 gold eagles. I agreed and pocketed the money. The next 20-plus days of travel were uneventful. We spotted jackalmen and dog-headed creatures a few times, but they ran when they saw our numbers. The most interesting sight was a giant tribe, only about a dozen of them, each 3 to 5 meters tall, herding woolly elephants that looked like mammoths. Even their children were nearly 2 meters. I watched from a distance, fascinated. Wayne said giants were shy and rarely attacked humans unless provoked. Some tribes even traded with people. I briefly fantasized about recruiting them. Imagine a giant in full armor swinging a huge axe. But she said others had tried. Giants wouldn't take orders, wouldn't travel far from their tribe, and only worked temporarily in exchange for goods. Then we entered Valor Domain, my land. Kyle pointed it out. We rode around for half a day surveying it. The territory was genuinely good, clearly a favor from Marquis Val. There was a fertile plain of about 300 square kilometers with 2 rivers running southeast through it. A normal inland baron only got about 50 square kilometers, and that was already developed land with tax-paying residents. Mine was all wilderness, needing everything built from scratch, years or decades of investment. But the potential was enormous. We camped one night on my plains, then continued south. After another 2 weeks, we finally left West Sea's territory and reached Long Forest Town, the first human settlement. Before the conquest, this had been the kingdom's northwestern frontier. From here, the main route south to Eagle City was much safer and more comfortable than the northern path through Red Rock Valley. Kyle suggested resting for a day to resupply. I agreed immediately. By now everyone stank. Weeks without a proper bath. Even Wayne's had a faint smell of sweat. I could only imagine what I smelled like. We arrived at Long Forest Town, Baron Gill's territory. His castle sat on about 20 acres with walls 5 to 6 meters high, surrounded by a 3-meter earth wall enclosing the main town, rows of houses and shops where free citizens lived. Merchants and travelers camped outside the walls. Our group of nearly 300 drew the guards' attention, but they just watched from the walls. Kyle told me there was an entry fee of 1 silver sheep per person. I thought the Baron was clever at squeezing money. I told Mad to get all my soldiers inside and handed him the coins. Kyle watched silently, clearly puzzled why I trusted these soldiers more than him, my future father-in-law and financial backer. The town smelled like animal dung. The workers were slowly cleaning the streets with pushcarts. We found 3 inns total. The biggest one, Long Forest Inn, was nearly empty, a bad sign meaning overpriced or poor service. But the other 2 were too small for our group, so we went back. I ordered a feast for everyone. Roast beef, sausages, roast fish, black bread, vegetable soup, butter, apples, and ale for each soldier. For myself, I added white bread, cheese, and stewed pheasant. The food was actually quite good, properly spiced, decent salt. No wonder it cost more, about 30% above normal prices. The shopkeeper got nervous with 40-plus armed men eating in his place and sent for town guards, who stood outside in the street. I didn't blame him. The total bill came to 15 silver deer and 6 silver sheep, less than 1 gold eagle. A bargain for feeding everyone so well. After eating, I ordered hot water for baths. We split into 2 groups, 1 bathing, 1 standing guard. Mad bought over 40 sets of linen underclothes for the soldiers and a special wool and linen outfit for me that cost over a gold coin. It had nice patterns woven in. I went upstairs, had Ailey and Sarit help me out of my armor, and climbed into a wooden tub. The hot water felt incredible after weeks on the road. Then Ailey knocked and asked if I wanted a prostitute sent up. My body reacted immediately, but I forced myself to say no. After the witch incident, I wasn't trusting any unknown woman near me while I was vulnerable. I remembered a Korean movie where a king got stabbed in the neck with a hairpin while in bed with a woman, blood spraying everywhere. That image kept me disciplined. I soaked until the water went cold, dried off, put on the new clothes, got my armor back on, and walked out with my sword. A man who looked like a butler was waiting outside. He'd apparently been there a while. "Sir Simon, Baron Gill invites you to visit the castle as his guest," he said respectfully. A butler named Chadrick came to invite me to Baron Gill's castle. Something felt off. He was way too insistent. I'd never met this baron, had no connection to him. So why the desperate invitation? I told him I needed to check with my fiancée first, buying time. I immediately ordered my soldiers to finish bathing within 30 minutes. Once everyone was cleaned up and back in armor, I said we were leaving right away. Chad was still waiting outside the inn. I invited him to walk with me to the town gate, pretending I needed to consult Wayneys first. He declined and said he'd wait. Meanwhile, I noticed 3 squads of town guards had appeared on the street, 36 armed men total, in various levels of armor. Clearly the Baron was applying pressure. I walked out calmly, even stopping to order 2,000 jean of barley from a shop and having it delivered outside town. Once past the walls, I relaxed. A regular baron might have 100 or 200 real soldiers, nothing that could threaten our combined force. I told Kylil about the castle invitation. He confirmed my suspicions immediately. He said I shouldn't attend any noble gatherings until Wayneys and I had produced an heir. These old noble families were all connected in complicated webs. Baron Gill almost certainly meant harm. Poison, assassination, hired bandits. Those were the standard noble tricks. However, directly assassinating a lord was still considered a major taboo. One southern earl who'd hired killers against a rival was stripped down to baron by the king, then crushed by neighboring nobles over decades until his family was completely destroyed. Kylil's advice was simple. Get the title in Eagle City, by slaves, and go straight back to Valor Domain. Build up the territory quietly where we'd be safe. I sent Sarit to tell a gate guard to pass a message to Chad. I had urgent business. I'd visit another time. We mounted up and left. Back at the castle, the truth came out. Chad reported to Baron Gill, who was furious. He revealed this was a mission ordered by an Earl Anderson through a secret letter. Gill had planned to poison my food at the inn, but we'd arrived with too many soldiers, and he'd gotten word too late. He sent Chad chasing after us with a new bait, claiming he wanted to marry his daughter to me, told privately, so only I would hear. Then he wrote a letter on sheepskin and sent it by raven to someone unknown. Meanwhile, riding along on my horse, I checked my troop roster. After the good meal, hot baths, and new clothes, loyalty scores had jumped back up. Nearly everyone was at 100. Taking care of your people really did win hearts. I also noticed all the wounded soldiers still stored in my roster had fully healed on their own. I considered summoning them, but decided to wait until after the ceremony, back in Valor Domain. No point feeding and paying extra soldiers when I didn't need them yet. Once we entered the Forest Valley region, there were actual roads, which sped things up. But about an hour in, riders caught up to us. It was Chad the butler again, with a few cavalrymen. He was brought to me alone. He whispered that Baron Gil had a daughter my age and wanted to arrange a marriage. I'd had enough of this suspicious nonsense. "Seize him," I shouted. Ailey and Sarit grabbed him off his horse instantly. His escort was surrounded by Kylo's mercenaries and didn't dare move. I drew my sword and pressed it against Chad's neck. He crumbled immediately, zero backbone. The tip broke his skin and a thin line of blood ran down. He spilled everything. Baron Gil had received a secret letter from Earl Anderson ordering him to kill me. The Earl wanted to secure a barony in West Seas for his favorite illegitimate son, who had no military achievements to earn one properly. The royal family had kept 30 territories in West Seas, 15 as crown land supporting a border army, 15 granted to new lords. I was one of those 15 and the weakest target with no real backing. My heart sank. The road to Eagle City was more dangerous than I'd thought, and Anderson probably wasn't the only one watching me. I let Chad go but kept his fine warhorse as both compensation and a warning to Baron Gil. Killing Chad would have created a blood feud I couldn't afford. Long Forest Town sat on an important road I'd need to use later. Chad scrambled onto one of his escort's horses and galloped away. One unlucky rider was left running after them on foot. We pushed hard and cleared Baron Gil's territory within hours. He didn't pursue. Spending his entire army on his lord's private scheme wasn't worth crippling himself over. After that, we passed through several villages and another baron's castle without stopping. The Forest Valley region had been under kingdom control for nearly a century, so it was much safer than West Seas. We even spotted ghosts drifting through the woods at night. Creepy looking, but harmless. Couldn't even hurt civilians. Non-human races were completely absent here, either killed, driven out, or enslaved long ago. We traveled another dozen days. The further south we went, the hotter it got. Iron armor soaked up heat, so we rested longer at midday. During breaks, I'd hold Waynies close while studying magic language. We'd gotten very comfortable with each other by now. Cuddling was routine, and we would have gone further if we weren't always camping in the open. I'd memorized over 200 magical characters and could read decent portions of the Earth meditation method. Evenings I practiced swordsmanship and archery with Sarit. My one-handed weapon skill hit 30, apprentice level. Archery was slower, just entry level, still couldn't aim properly. One afternoon, I was getting cozy with Waynies when villagers approached our perimeter asking for help with some kind of trouble. I ignored it and stayed buried in her soft embrace until Kylo's deputy Rick came over and awkwardly interrupted us. Waynies pushed me away, blushing furiously. Rick caught a glimpse, looked away fast, and stammered nervously. I kept my face flat and said, "Lead the way." Kylo pulled me aside. Villagers from Rest Village wanted to hire us to wipe out a bandit camp on Knife Tip Mountain. 200 gold eagles reward. His mercenaries were eager, and refusing would cause resentment. Mercenaries run on profit. I told him to go ahead. I could protect myself. We'd camp by the Green Valley Road and wait for them to come back. He worried about me trusting Ailey's soldiers too much, calling them former mercenaries who'd do anything for money. I just smiled. He didn't know where they really came from. He offered to leave 20 men behind. I refused and told him to take everyone. The bandit job might be tougher than expected. I vaguely mentioned my soldiers were left to me by my late cousin, adding some mystery. Kylo's expression shifted. He'd assumed I was completely dependent on him, but my 40-plus elite troops had disrupted his calculations. He left with the mercenary company, saying he'd be back in 5 days at most. The village chief paid half up front. 1 gold eagle per man, 2 for squad leaders, 3 for his deputies. 2 hours after they left, I took Ailey and Sarit into the forest and summoned every remaining soldier from my roster. Now I had over 120 troops, 6 heavy cavalry, 14 light cavalry, 9 heavy infantry, 21 light infantry, 18 longbowmen, and the rest were militia. They all came out dizzy and with no memories, but after Ailey explained things, they pledged loyalty. Wayne saw them and asked who they were. I just said they were soldiers inherited from my family. She didn't push it. I ordered Yaman to take 50 men and build a wooden fort. They worked about 7 or 8 hours and did an impressive job. A hexagonal double-walled timber fort about 60 meters across, 3 meters high. with watchtowers at each corner reaching nearly 5 meters. One gate faced the road, and they'd even built a small wooden house inside for me, about 20 square meters. I set rules immediately. No one relieves themselves inside camp during the day, 5 lashes for violators, and build a latrine in the western corner for nighttime use. For dinner, I ordered 2 sheep slaughtered. Only my soldiers got mutton. The servants had porridge and black bread with a little butter. Waynies and I had lamb leg and stewed chicken. After eating, I pulled Waynies into the wooden house. She hesitated but gave in. Inside, I took off my armor and had someone bring a bucket of clean water. I stripped down and scrubbed myself with wet linen cloth. Waynies blushed but helped wash my back. Then I helped wash her. And there in the quiet of the night, things naturally progressed from there. The next morning I walked out feeling fantastic. I ordered 2 chickens stewed for Waynies. Her first time, she was still sore. She walked a bit funny but smiled sweetly when I offered to escort her to the latrine. We were getting along very well. Poor Sarit had been guarding the door all night with dark circles under his eyes. He said he couldn't sleep. I figured he'd overheard us despite our efforts to stay quiet. I sent him to rest and called Ailey to take over. After breakfast, I continued studying the earth meditation method with Waynies. By midday, I tried meditating for real, sat cross-legged for over an hour following her instructions exactly. Nothing happened. Magic required natural talent, and without it, practice was useless. But I'd gained enough experience to level up again, earning 1 upgrade point. Interestingly, my night with Waynies had given surprisingly good experience, a whole new avenue I hadn't considered. I put the point into magic immediately. Knowledge of the earth meditation flooded my mind. Within moments, a magic seed formed inside me, and my eyes briefly flashed pale yellow. "You did it," Waynies said, shocked. She taught me a beginner spell called Mage Hand, an invisible force that could pick up small objects. I learned it in about 2 hours, lifting a small stone on my first successful attempt. It had taken her over a month. She stared at me, stunned, and asked if I was some kind of genius. I shrugged and said it seemed pretty easy. Then a soldier reported someone was scouting our camp. Ailey went to investigate and came back with a prisoner, a thin young man in studded leather armor with dirty yellowish-brown hair. After a beating, the captive talked fast. He was from the Iron Hill Mercenary Company, 154 men total. They'd been hired to kill someone, he didn't know who, and was getting paid 5 silver deer for the job. They were planning to attack soon. It clicked. The village bandit bounty that lured Kyle away was probably a setup. Someone wanted his mercenaries separated from me. Waynies panicked about her father's safety. I calmed her down. Kyle was a gold-level warrior, far stronger than anyone I had, including Ailey, who was only silver level. Nobody was targeting Kyle himself. They just wanted him away from me. My plan was simple. Stay inside our fort, wait 5 days. If the War Spear Company came back, great. If not, we'd head to Eagle City on our own. I told Waynies that even if something happened to her father, her brother could inherit the business and our marriage agreement would stand. Meanwhile, I'd been quietly upgrading my companions. Yaman got Iron Flesh and engineering boosts. Mad got Iron Flesh and trading. Sarit got Iron Flesh and trainer skill, which would help soldiers improve their weapon proficiency faster. I was saving Ailey's 5 points. I wanted to give him Battle Fury once he had time to learn the raiding fire-breathing technique, rather than dumping everything into raw strength. I was also eyeing Kaelin, my field medic, as a future mage candidate. She had a nice figure too. I was thinking she could become Valor Domain's chief mage, and maybe something more personal down the line. Waynies seemed a bit disappointed I wouldn't rush to help her father, but when I explained that leaving the fort was exactly what the enemy wanted, she calmed down. The mercenary company wasn't the target, I was. A few kilometers from our fort, the Iron Hill Mercenary Company, over 150 men, had made camp. Their leader was a short but powerful man named Turl, said to have some dwarf blood. His scouts had been caught, and now he knew our defenses were stronger than expected. He sent a squad leader called Hound with 30-some lightly armored men to probe us that night. I waited until midnight with no sign of attack, so I split my soldiers into 2 shifts and went to sleep with Waynies in the wooden house. Sometime later, shouting and the thwack of arrows woke me. The enemy was outside the walls firing blindly into camp. The servants panicked and huddled against the western wall for cover. I had Waynies help me into my armor and grab my sword. The moment I opened the door, an arrow thunked into the doorframe right beside me. I ducked fast and told Waynes to stay inside. Sarit arrived with shield-carrying soldiers to cover me. The problem was simple. It was pitch black outside. Our archers on the watchtowers couldn't see the enemy to shoot back. I called Waynes out. She needed her staff for the light spell since she hadn't inscribed the rune into her spirit sea, a mental space that entry-level mages could create to store spell patterns for quick casting. Her staff, called Guardian's Radiance, could cast both light and healing spells. A soldier sprinted to fetch it from her carriage. Once she had it, I grabbed an iron-rimmed wooden shield from a soldier and held it over her as we moved to a watchtower. She cast the spell. A blazing white orb floated up, turning the area bright as day for about 17 or 18 seconds. That was all Sarit and the longbowman needed. Arrows flew with deadly accuracy. Sarit's first shot punched straight through Hound's eye into his brain, killing their squad leader without even knowing it. Over a dozen enemy fighters dropped dead in those few seconds. The survivors scattered into the dark forest in panic. Some of them ran into ghouls and walking dead that lurked in the dense woods at night. Ailey wanted to chase them. I refused. Nobody leaves the fort before dawn. I ordered Mad to prepare a late-night meal. He set up iron pots and cooked wheat porridge with big chunks of butter. That greasy, warm bowl made everyone happy. Waynes and I shared half a white bread and some cheese, then went back to the wooden house. No removing armor tonight, so no cuddling. We both just lay down in our gear with her staff within arm's reach. We slept until the sun was well up, stepped outside together, stretched, and looked up at a perfect blue sky with scattered white clouds. Another good day. Back at the Iron Hill camp, their leader Turl was furious. Hound was dead, arrow through the eye, out the back of the skull. The survivors reported at least 20 elite archers and a mage inside our fort. Turl cursed the person who'd hired him for giving bad intelligence and called off the whole job, demanding more money. Meanwhile, I sent militia to collect loot from the night attack, about a dozen iron swords and leather armor sets, most damaged by arrows but still worth something. Each dead man had a small coin purse too. Ailey wanted to send cavalry to find the enemy camp. I said no. What would we do if we found it? Attack 150 mercenaries. That was pointless. Ailey was a great fighter, but not much of a strategist. Sarit was far more level-headed, trained as a proper military officer. 3 quiet days passed. I studied magic with Waynes and practiced sword and archery with Sarit. Then Ailey spotted Kylo's men coming down the road from the west. They looked roughed up, bloodstains, fewer men than before, but they'd completed the job. I opened the gates without worry. I now had more soldiers than him. He noticed my expanded force immediately and frowned, warning me about taking in unknown people. I told him firmly that these were my soldiers. I trusted them, and he didn't need to know more. His face darkened briefly. Then he put on a cooperative smile. After half a day's rest and a big meal of stewed mutton, we abandoned the fort and continued south along the Green Valley Road. The rest of the journey was peaceful, just the occasional ghoul or walking dead, nothing serious. The kingdom's interior had been tamed over centuries. Finally, we spotted Eagle City in the distance. It was the real thing, an actual city, not just a castle with walls around it. Only 3 true cities existed along our route, and this was the grandest. The road was now busy with merchant caravans and travelers everywhere. The mercenaries started laughing and joking, clearly thinking about the pleasures waiting in the city. Kylo told me to find him at White Gull Port, about 70 li east, after my title ceremony. The 100 slave soldiers he'd promised were nearly ready. He also suggested buying additional slaves there to develop my territory, since no free citizens would willingly move to Wild Valor domain. He explained that White Gull Port's slaves came from the central continent across the Storm Sea to the east. The Eagle Kingdom had been founded over 500 years ago by fleeing nobles from there. That continent now had 5 warring nations constantly producing prisoners and displaced civilians. Slave traders shipped them across the sea, but the Storm Sea was only calm for 1 or 2 months per year, allowing roughly 1 round trip. These slaves were the same race as us, making them much more useful than beastmen. I told Kylo to go ahead and pre-order some agricultural slaves for me, plus blacksmiths, stonemasons, and carpenters. I authorized him to spend up to 2,000 gold eagles on slaves. He nodded and rode off with his mercenary company. Wayne stayed with me. I looked at Eagle City ahead and smiled. Let's go in. We reached Eagle City. It was impressive, gray-white walls about 10 meters high, arrow towers even taller, the whole thing shaped like an oval covering a small hill, maybe 20 li across. The gate had a design like a death trap for attackers. You'd need tens of thousands of elite soldiers to take this place. At the gate, a guard officer stopped us. Mercenaries couldn't enter wearing armor. Ailey got loud, saying we weren't mercenaries but a baron's men. The officer calmly pointed out we had no family crest. I stepped in and explained I was here for my title ceremony. He said barons could only bring their knights and 10 armored soldiers inside. Everyone else had to stay in Fledgling Town, a bustling settlement just outside the western wall. I gave Mad 10 gold eagles to cover everyone's pay and supplies. I decided on monthly wages, 2 silver sheep for militia, for light infantry, 1 silver deer for longbowmen, 2 for heavy infantry, and 5 silver deer for heavy cavalry. Then I took Waynies, her maids, Ailey, Sarit, and 10 soldiers into the city. Inside was pretty nice, wide roads with dedicated lanes for horse traffic, people cleaning up manure, no public urination allowed. It actually felt like a proper capital. I skipped cleaning up and went straight to the Royal Administrative Office beside the palace. No delays. Anyone wanting me dead might try something before I got my title. Guards let me in after I showed the Marquis's sealed letter. A well-dressed official led me through several courtyards to a heavily guarded compound. 18 elite soldiers in iron brigandine over double chainmail stood at the entrance, wearing red cloaks and linings, clearly special forces. Only I could enter, unarmed. I handed my sword to Ailey and walked in alone. Inside was a grand but simply furnished room. A brown-haired middle-aged man sat behind a black desk, writing with a quill. He didn't look up for a while. This was McKen, the hand of the king, essentially the king's right-hand man. He finally looked up, took the Marquis's letter, read it carefully for several minutes, then studied my face. "Dilly, set up Sir Simon at the Golden Eagle Manor," he said casually. "There'll be a ceremony in a few days. The Holland family is new, no coat of arms, no motto yet. Get those sorted quickly." Then he smiled at me. "You lucky kid. I'm almost jealous." He seemed like an easygoing, humorous person. I thanked him humbly and followed the guide out. The guide's attitude had completely changed, much friendlier now. He introduced himself as Dilly Mallon, second son of the Viscount of Blackrock Fort. He told me the Golden Eagle Manor was reserved exclusively for actual lords or their heirs. The envy on his face was obvious. I kept smiling modestly as he led us there. Near the manor were separate quarters for my escorts. The Golden Eagle Manor was gorgeous, like a small palace, flowers everywhere, walls coated in golden powder. Not real gold, but it looked impressive. I settled in with Waynies and finally enjoyed a proper hot bath, followed by some private time together. I stayed inside for several days, studying magic with Waynies and never going out. All meals were delivered by servants, and Waynies checked each one for poison using a detection spell. If food was poisoned, it would start stinking within seconds. That's why every lord needed a chief mage, mainly for personal safety. After a few days with no word about my ceremony, I started getting anxious. Maybe I needed to send gifts? But with Marquis Val's backing, I shouldn't face obstacles. I waited 2 more restless days before someone finally showed up. A counselor from the administrative office with a court tailor. We designed my family coat of arms. I kept it simple, a sun and moon shining together. For the family motto, I went with something standard, unyielding and eternal, nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. A few days later, the notice came, tomorrow's ceremony at Golden Eagle Fort, the royal residence. I cleaned up that evening, polished my armor until it gleamed, and went the next morning with Ailey and Sarit. Security was tight. I could wear armor but no weapons, and my escorts couldn't enter. Inside the palace hall, about a dozen officials stood silently on both sides, including someone in white robes who looked like a priest. Soon a tall, handsome man entered through a side door wearing a pale yellow coat with a red cape, accompanied by guards and attendants. "Greetings to Prince Eldon," everyone called out. I bowed along with them. "You're that lucky kid, Simon," he said cheerfully, clearly in a good mood. Then he drew his sword. I dropped to one knee. He laid the blade on my shoulder and spoke the formal words of investiture, granting me the title of Baron of Valor Domain. I recited my oath of loyalty to King Dario Bavaric, not the prince, the king. Getting that wrong would be a disaster. I'd rehearsed it dozens of times. The ceremony was quick and smooth. The prince left briskly but tossed one last remark over his shoulder. "Hire an etiquette teacher. Your movements are terrible." Outside, the guide told me my lord's crown and baron's seal were being crafted, and I'd need to wait in the city. A royal tax collector and a priest would be assigned to Valor Domain later. All West Seas nobles got 3 years tax-free, then only 10% for the following decade. The kingdom would also organize free citizens to migrate to West Seas, and every noble would need to settle some of them. I returned to the manor feeling excited. In a few months, I'd be back on my own land, ruling my own territory. It was June now. I'd arrive around October, just in time to plant rye for a harvest next summer. I celebrated with Waynies in the usual way, then spent the following days exploring Eagle City with my guards. Now that I was officially a baron, I felt much safer. Assassinating a titled noble in the capital was an enormous crime. The royal family and the noble council would hunt down whoever was responsible. It almost never happened during peacetime. On the 9th day, the counselor delivered my finished lord's crown and baron's seal, along with the family crest samples. The crown was a copper circlet with a red gemstone set in the front, flanked by my sun and moon emblem. The seal was a small copper block engraved with Valor Domain and the family crest. The Holland family was now officially real. Uncle Jolin and Cousin Sal had both died before completing these final steps. I was the one who brought it to life. Waynies couldn't take her eyes off the Lord's crown, smiling with pure joy. For commoners in this kingdom, becoming nobility was the ultimate dream, and now it was right in front of her. I tested the Baron's seal with red ink. The imprint showed Valor Domain, alongside the sun and moon crest. When she wasn't looking, I stored both items in my game inventory. Next morning we left Eagle City. I wanted to buy plate armor there, but heard White Gull Port had better prices. I did visit some magic and alchemy shops, but only bought a few healing potions. Everything was expensive. One basic fire staff cost 600 gold eagles, which could buy 100 trained slave soldiers instead. Not worth it. We picked up the main force at Fledgling Town, and I secretly bought extra grain for my inventory. Everyone looked healthier now, well-fed and filled out. Since all my troops had horses, we moved fast and reached White Gull Port before noon. It was a real coastal city, about half the size of Eagle City, with a harbor full of ships. The streets were full of armed people. No weapons ban here, but the city guard was impressive. Patrols of 18 well-equipped soldiers passed by constantly, all clearly battle-hardened veterans. Kylo met us and bowed. "Greetings, Baron Simon." He'd managed to buy about 800 slaves from a recent shipment, but demand was fierce. Every West Seas noble was buying. He was still waiting on 300 trained slave soldiers he'd ordered, 100 of which were mine per our deal. I suggested we hold the wedding while waiting. He was thrilled. I told him to handle all the arrangements. Then I called over Hilter and my 5 hometown buddies. I sent them back to Greenflower Village to bring my mother and sister here. I also told Hilter to spread the word. Any villagers willing to relocate to Valor Domain would get 20 years at only 40% tax, and whoever cleared farmland would own the rights to use it. The kingdom's standard tax was 50%, so this was a real incentive. I sent Sarit with 20 soldiers as escort and gave both him and Hilter a gold eagle for travel expenses. Way more than Hilter needed, but I wanted my old friends to show off a little back home. Kylo took us to his estate outside the city, a rented property on land belonging to the local earl. The rental was year to year, unstable. The local nobles kept squeezing him for more money, and he felt his time in White Gull Port was running out. That was a big reason he'd invested so heavily in marrying his daughter to me. It was his exit strategy. He could have simply pledged loyalty to me and become a landed knight. But Kylo had bigger ambitions. A knight title was too small for him. He wanted to eventually become a baron himself. We arrived at Kylo's Windroom estate. Over 300 acres with dozens of buildings, large farmland, and a thick earth wall surrounding everything. It looked almost like a baron's settlement, just missing a castle. Golden wheat fields stretched out before us, being harvested by workers. Kylo told me my slaves were out there helping with the harvest, and they were good farmhands. He even gifted me the entire grain harvest, about 40,000 gene total. Generous, but I quickly did the math. that would feed 3,000 people for barely a week. He'd bought me some skilled slaves too. 3 blacksmiths, 7 carpenters, 1 horse breeder, 2 cooks, 17 construction workers, and 5 stonemasons. The skilled ones cost at least 3 gold eagles each. One experienced blacksmith in his 40s cost as much as a premium warhorse. I told Kyle to keep buying. I needed 2,000 agricultural slaves total, 300 oxen with carts, and more craftsmen. He'd already collected over 100 oxen and said the carts would be no problem. The real headache was feeding everyone. 2,000 slaves doing hard labor needed at least 3 gen of grain per person daily. The next harvest wouldn't come until next summer. That meant stockpiling around 2 million gen. Buying it wasn't the main issue, transporting it was. My inventory helped, but it was already half full. I visited the skilled slaves in their courtyard. Kyle announced I was their master, and they all dropped to their knees calling master. I told them to stand. I was completely comfortable with this now. All my modern morals about slavery had been tossed aside without a second thought. They were a mix, former slaves and former free citizens from several kingdoms across the central continent. All had undergone obedience training, making them, cooked slaves, more expensive but much easier to manage than untrained, raw slaves. Kyle had also ordered 300 trained slave soldiers from Slave Bay at 6 gold eagles each. They weren't elite, but they were disciplined and loyal, successfully brainwashed. He told me about Slave Bay's most famous product, fearless iron warriors, raised from childhood on alchemical drugs. Emotionless killing machines, utterly loyal, who fought to the death. They cost as much as a premium warhorse each and were only sold in units of 54, the minimum for their battle formation. The catch, they'd suddenly deteriorate and die after 7 or 8 years. The next evening, Sarit and Hilter returned with my mother and sister. My mother Bala was 33, average height, village beauty level looks, warm and kind. She cried with joy seeing me, but seemed intimidated by my armor, wanting to hug me, but not daring to. I had no real feelings for this woman. She was the original Simon's mother, not mine, but I went to her, held her hand, and said kind things. My little sister Jenny was 8 or 9, sturdy and cheerful, with reddish-brown hair. The old Simon had been good to her, and she used to follow him everywhere. I smiled warmly and reached to pat her head, but she pulled back slightly. She sensed something different about me. A flash of killing intent crossed my mind, then vanished just as fast. She was just a little girl. Even if the real Simon came home from war, there'd be some distance between siblings. I told my mother they'd live comfortably from now on and assigned Kalen to look after them. Hilter had also brought about 30 young men from our village, friends and neighbors hoping for opportunity in my territory. I had them all settled in at the estate. Kyle returned with everything ready for the wedding. In a private meeting, he handed over the remaining gold eagles, nearly 3,700 in a small wooden chest, gleaming and beautiful. 20-plus years of his savings, half gone in one deal. His face stayed calm, but I knew it hurt. I had Ailey lock the chest in my room with orders to kill anyone unauthorized who came near it. Later I stored all the coins in my inventory. Kyle then asked if his second son Ritter, a bronze-level warrior around 20 years old, could serve as my bodyguard. I hesitated, but when he sweetened the deal with another 100 trained slave soldiers on top of the original 100, I agreed immediately. Kyle's expression flickered. I think he was starting to regret choosing me. He'd expected a naive 16-year-old he could control, not someone this greedy and calculating with a mysterious loyal army he couldn't infiltrate. The next morning we held the wedding at White Gull Port's Holy Chapel. It was surprisingly simple. New clothes, prayers led by a priest, a ceremony, signed the marriage papers. No feast. The whole thing was done by mid-morning. Most guests were Kyle's business contacts, merchants, and mercenary captains. But one notable guest arrived, the estate manager of Marquis Val's city residence. He announced he was there on the Marquis's behalf to offer congratulations. The entire hall went silent. I thanked him warmly and asked him to convey my respects. Afterward, I kicked myself for not visiting the Marquis's residence earlier. Even though Val himself was in West Seas, leaving behind a mistress and steward, paying a visit would have shown proper respect. I was part of his faction now and needed to act like it. A former commoner could be forgiven for not knowing these things, but I needed to learn fast. After the ceremony, I left Wayne's with Kalen and took all my soldiers shopping for equipment. White Gull Port had excellent trade, and I found a weapons merchant working for an earl from the south. He showed me everything. Full knight plate armor with chain and cotton lining, impervious to anything except enchanted weapons, at 120 gold eagles per set plus 60 for horse armor. Then plate and chain hybrid armor at 60 gold eagles. Then various lighter combinations going down from there. I calculated carefully. Archers didn't need heavy armor. Iron-studded leather plus a full-body single-layer chainmail would do. Heavy armor would tire them out, and drawing a bow was exhausting work. Archers were hard to train and valuable, so decent protection without the weight was the right balance. I upgraded everyone's equipment. The militia in leather armor got iron brigandine chest plates with full double-layer chainmail underneath, plus iron helmets and proper weapons, swords with shields, spears with shields, or two-handed spears. Heavy infantry and heavy cavalry already had good gear, so they just needed spare weapons. Light cavalry got brigandine with single-layer chainmail. For Ailey, I bought a full knight plate armor set. He'd be my frontline fighter. Sarit got plate and chain hybrid since his role was more about training troops and commanding. I also got myself a knight armor set. Just those two knight sets with horse armor cost 360 gold eagles. The total bill for everything came to over 1,300 gold eagles. I hesitated, but weapons and armor were survival essentials. After Mad haggled off the extras, I paid. The merchant was delighted and threw in 500 iron-tipped arrows and 60 armor-piercing arrows for free. Half a day later, everyone was re-equipped. My 100-plus soldiers now looked like a proper elite force. On the way back, a huge man blocked our path and dropped to one knee. He was Keelong, captain of the Iron Bear Mercenary Company, 93 battle-tested warriors. He wanted to pledge loyalty to me in exchange for eventually becoming a landed knight. His selling point: his group had bad blood with Kylo's War Spear Company, making him a natural counterbalance. He even offered a golden deer statue as tribute. I told him I'd evaluate him first. He was thrilled. I quietly sent Mad to investigate the Iron Bear's reputation around town. Back at the Windroom Trading Company headquarters, Wayne's greeted me. The place was impressive. Kylo owned over a dozen shops, filling an entire street. The man was capable, no question, but ambitious people like him were hard to keep under control. I gave Wayne's 500 gold eagles and told her to buy oxen, draft horses, and grain, mostly rye and barley, using her father's trading network if sellers showed up while I was away. She took the heavy coin pouch without complaint. In our room, she helped me out of my armor. I lay down on the bed, and she curled up against me like a cat. But I wasn't sleeping. I was secretly upgrading my soldiers' stats. Unlike my own upgrades, which hit hard and fast, theirs took effect gradually without any obvious discomfort. After half an hour, everyone was done. My troops averaged around level 6 now. Light infantry all had iron flesh at 5, high warrior level. Archers got iron flesh 4 plus some points in athletics. Heavy infantry reached iron flesh 8, bronze warrior level. Heavy cavalry sat at 7 with extra points in riding. I saved Ailey and Sarit's new points for later. I wanted to develop them as knights once they learned the breathing technique. With the upgrades finished, I turned my attention to the beautiful woman in my arms, and soon the room filled with soft sounds. After a few days at the Windroom Trading Company, slave ships finally arrived at the port. 57 ships carrying over 30,000 slaves, flying the Octopus Kraken flag of Slave Bay. I grabbed 100 soldiers and rushed to the docks. Kylo was already there with 70 or 80 of his men. Other buyers started showing up too, dozens of noble representatives, all hungry for slaves. Kylo introduced me to Kumo, the slave master, a curly-haired, yellow-skinned man in a yellow robe, clearly a different race from the kingdom's people. He was friendly and business-minded. Prices had gone up due to demand from West Seas nobles. Upper-class farm slaves cost 10 silver deer each, middle-class ones and fertile women cost 6 silver deer each. I ordered 200 upper slaves, 500 middle slaves, and 500 women who could bear children. Then came the real shopping. The Central Continent was in a massive war, and tons of skilled workers had been captured and sold. This was a rare opportunity. Kumo listed everything: blacksmiths, stonemasons, carpenters, smelters, pharmacists or prospectors, brewers, weavers. The prices were steep. A top blacksmith cost 100 gold eagles. A master carpenter was 36. But skilled workers created enormous value, so I bought heavily. 1 top blacksmith, 3 mid-level, 20 apprentices. 2 top stonemasons, 10 mid-level, 100 entry-level. 1 master carpenter, 2 upper, 5 mid-level, 50 entry-level. Top and mid-level smelters, pharmacists, or prospectors, a brewer, weavers. I rattled off a long list. Kamo burst out laughing. Baron Simon, you're buying out my entire stock. Kyle's eyebrows kept climbing higher with concern. The total came to 1,550 gold eagles. I had Mad bring out a chest containing 2,100 gold eagles. More than enough. Kamo's eyes lit up with greed. He tried selling me Nightingale, pleasure slaves, beautiful, sterilized women trained in 36 techniques. I said I'd look at them later. What I actually wanted were trained female attendants with guaranteed loyalty, much more reliable than hiring free citizens. The slave soldiers were handed over in a formal ceremony. Kamo gave me a black staff and announced me as their one true master. My 200 trained soldiers looked decent, average build, standing in neat rows, wearing leather armor and carrying spears. The 500 servant soldiers going to Kylo were thinner and weaker, in cloth armor with cheaper weapons. They could probably handle farm slaves, but would struggle against anything more serious. I spent over 3 hours personally inspecting every slave before handing over the gold. Then Kamo lined up his Nightingale pleasure slaves for me to browse. They were stunning. Every single one had a gorgeous figure and captivating face. The upper-tier ones were as beautiful as Wayne's, or even more so. A mix of innocent and seductive that made it hard to think straight. My soldiers' eyes nearly popped out of their heads. Mine almost did too. Upper Nightingales cost 128 gold eagles each. Mid-tier 64. Entry-level 24. Regular servant girls were 6. I swallowed hard. These prices matched a full suit of knight armor. Kamo tried pushing the upper-tier ones, saying many were illegitimate daughters of great nobles from the central continent. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I forced myself to look away and told myself, later, when I have more money. For now, I bought 4 servant girls and 1 entry-level Nightingale. The servant girls were pale-skinned young women, and the Nightingale was curvy, fair-skinned, and quite pretty. She'd turn heads anywhere. I named her Spring Orchid. Then Kylo casually spoke up. I'll take 2 upper-tier Nightingales. I stared at him. This old fox still had money to burn. After the deals were done, I organized all my slaves for registration at the kingdom's local administrative office. Male slaves had brands on their faces. Female slaves got pink tattoos on their shoulders. Nearly 3,000 people were crammed into the Wind Room Trading Company's back courtyard for the night. Sitting shoulder to shoulder, women separated, skilled slaves and soldiers given tents. Feeding them all was already planned. Kalen and Wayneys oversaw 10 huge pots of rye porridge with butter, plus a dozen slaughtered sheep. 3,000 cloth bags and wooden bowls were ready. The soldiers ate first, porridge and a piece of mutton each. Then the farm slaves got plain porridge. The whole process was eerily quiet and orderly. These slave bay-trained slaves were incredibly obedient, like sheep. No fighting, no chaos. Impressive, honestly. That evening, Spring Orchid and the servant girls helped me out of my armor while a bath was being prepared. Then Sarit knocked. Kylo wanted to see me. He walked in with 6 Nightingale slaves behind him. The 2 upper-tier beauties he'd just bought, plus 4 entry-level ones. A gift for you, Baron Simon, he said with a warm smile. My brain knew this was a trap. He wanted to cloud my judgment with beautiful women and make me dependent on pleasures. But looking at those 2 stunning women, my body didn't care what my brain thought. I accepted them. After Kylo left, the 6 Nightingales bowed and cooed, Master, in voices like singing birds. My heart melted. Then I snapped out of it. I immediately spent my newest upgrade point on resistance. A cool wave washed through my head and entire body. When I looked at those gorgeous women again, the overwhelming desire had faded to something manageable. I sent them all away and told Spring Orchid to find them rooms. This was a test of self-control, and I had to pass it. Beauty was seasoning, not the main dish. If I couldn't master this, I'd never build anything great. Kylo was more dangerous than I'd realized. He'd bought those 2 upper Nightingales specifically to give away, spending over 250 gold eagles just to plant temptation in my household. A man who could resist that kind of beauty and willingly hand them over was terrifying. No wonder he'd built such an empire from nothing. I raised his threat level in my mind another notch. After a pleasant night with Waynies, we woke late and starving. Spring Orchid brought a lavish breakfast: roast lamb, beef, fish, cheese, butter, white bread, soup, and sliced apples. We demolished everything. Waynies ate more than I expected. No wonder she had such generous curves. I called Ailey, Sarit, and Kyle for a meeting. The slaves had been perfectly behaved overnight. Not a single one tried to escape. Even Ailey was impressed, having stayed up all night worrying for nothing. Kyle reported the supply numbers: 350 ox carts, 200 horse carts, 30,000 bushels of rye, 12,000 barley, 3,000 wheat, 2,000 black beans. Total cost: 382 gold eagles. I marveled at how cheap grain was. All that food cost less than 3 upper-tier Nightingale slaves. We had enough supplies to reach Valor Domain. Between my secret inventory storage and the wild resources available there, berries, game, edible plants, starvation wasn't a concern. And traveling merchants would reach West Seas eventually. Kyle would stay behind to run the Windroom Trading Company and keep buying supplies for me. His son Ritter would come along with 100 trained soldiers and 500 servant soldiers. I promised Kyle a manor in Valor Domain once it was developed and offered to knight Ritter if he proved loyal. Kyle immediately brought him in for the ceremony. Ritter knelt, offered his sword, and swore his oath. I drew my blade and named him an honorary knight. He appeared in my troop roster at 81 loyalty. Not great. And I caught a flash of disappointment in Kyle's eyes. He'd wanted a landed knight title for his son, not just an honorary one. After everything he'd invested, he felt I was being stingy. I could practically hear him regretting his choice. But I wasn't handing out land grants to someone at 81 loyalty whose father was already scheming to manipulate me. My 200 purchased slave soldiers appeared in the roster too, all at 100 loyalty. Every single one. Slave Bay's brainwashing techniques were frighteningly effective. My total military strength was now over 300. I ordered everyone to prepare. We'd leave for the Windroom Estate today and depart for Valor Domain at sunrise tomorrow. The rest of the day, I checked on the slaves briefly, then retreated to the bedroom to read. Waynies had bought 3 expensive sheepskin books: A History of the Eagle Kingdom, A Guide to Noble Heraldry, and a Duke's Travel Journal describing the kingdom's geography and local customs. I started with the travel journal. It would help me understand each region quickly. Waynies curled up in my arms and read along with me. These were noble-only publications she'd never seen before either. Later, a maid knocked to say the tailor shop had delivered our family crest designs and banners. The maid brought in our family banners and crest pins. Waynies unfolded a flag, the sun and moon design in red on a yellow background, clean and simple. The craftsmanship was good. She held a crest pin against her chest, then against mine, playing with it happily while I went back to reading. For a light afternoon snack, we had honey wheat cakes with cream. Then I suited up in armor to inspect the preparations. The courtyard was packed, thousands of people shoulder to shoulder. Ailey and the others had organized everything well. Each of my personal soldiers supervised 10 slave soldiers, who managed 100 farm slaves each. Technical slaves had their own guards. Sarit led a mobile cavalry unit of light horsemen to watch over the whole column. I still had about 60 personal guards around me, plus Ritter's 600 slave soldiers for numbers, plus Keelong's Iron Bear mercenaries covering the rear. Their reputation checked out. Reliable, no broken promises. Around 3 in the afternoon, over 3,000 people marched out of White Gull Port in a column stretching hundreds of meters, 6 across. Quite a sight. Plenty of onlookers stared. We reached the Windroom Estate by nightfall. The harvested fields were empty now, but the area near the buildings was packed with 500 or 600 carts loaded with grain. Hundreds of sheep grazed in a fenced area. 20-some cooking pots were already steaming. The food hierarchy was strict. Farm slaves got 1 bowl of rye porridge. Slave soldiers got rye porridge plus a spoonful of butter. Valuable technical slaves like blacksmiths got barley porridge, butter, and even roast mutton. My personal soldiers ate properly: black bread, butter, potato soup, roast lamb. Waynies and I had the best of everything, over a dozen dishes. After dinner I inspected the camp, set up night watch, and went to bed. No entertainment available except making babies. At dawn I woke to colored light filtering through the glass window. This kingdom could produce glass, not very transparent, small pieces in various colors, but decent enough. I'd even bought 2 glass-making slaves among my technical workers. Waynies was still sleeping on my chest like a cat. I held her waist and dozed off again. When I woke properly, it was about 7:30. I slapped her hip. "Wake up, we're leaving today." She stretched and complained that her legs were still weak from last night. I lunged at her playfully. She threw up her hands. "No, I'm full. I'm stuffed." We laughed, got dressed. She scolded me for throwing her skirt under the table, and ate a big breakfast. The maids helped me into my heavy armor. I strapped on my sword and walked out. Time to head for Valor Domain. Mad reported everyone had eaten breakfast. I gave him an important order. All drinking water must be boiled first and stored in barrels. No one drinks unboiled water. It causes sickness. He looked confused but obeyed. Every slave was bought with real gold, and I didn't want any dying from something so preventable. We set off with Waynies in her fancy carriage and me on horseback. With 3,000 people, nobody dared bother us. Not bandits, not mercenaries. We camped each evening near streams or rivers since water was critical for this many people. The boiled water rule added extra work, but I enforced it strictly. A village chief asked for help along the way. I refused. Let the local lord handle it. I wasn't a charity. Over a month passed uneventfully. We reached the Green Valley Road, where the terrain got rougher, more forests, valleys, and dangerous wildlife. Ghouls and walking dead appeared occasionally. One village reported a vampire had killed several people. I wasn't interested in solving their problems either, but I tightened our formation. Vampires in this world weren't incredibly powerful. They used some blood magic, and only the strongest ones could turn into bats. Those lived in the far western wilderness. The ones inland were like hunted rats, hiding in dense forests. One morning, Ailey told me a slave had been found dead outside camp during the night, completely drained of blood. He'd gone out alone to relieve himself. I ordered that no one goes anywhere alone at night. Bathroom trips required groups of at least 10, with someone keeping watch. Chasing a vampire through unfamiliar hills and forests was pointless. But if we caught it in the act, Waynies had a tracking spell that revealed dark creatures within 30 meters. Then we could overwhelm it with armored soldiers. 2 more days passed. The vampire attacked again, but was driven off. Just one creature, confirming our suspicions. I asked Waynies about garlic. She said vampires hated the smell, but it couldn't actually harm them. I sent Mad to buy garlic and more grain at the nearest town, Greystone. He came back with several strings of garlic and dozens of carts of grain. Greystone was dealing with vampire problems too. Every household had garlic hanging, and the local lord was hiring a group called the Blade Society to hunt it down. Garlic prices had tripled. I ordered garlic distributed to every night watchman, hung on all outer tents, and crushed into the evening porridge. Not a perfect solution, but better than nothing. If this vampire kept harassing us, I'd have to set up an ambush with Waynies and her tracking magic to kill it for good. My own magic had been improving steadily. I'd learned several small spells beyond Mage Hand, though I still couldn't inscribe runes into my Spirit Sea for instant casting. That was genuinely difficult. Waynies had studied magic for nearly 10 years and only managed to inscribe one spell, Guardian Aura. The garlic worked. No more vampire attacks that night. We kept moving. At a midday rest, I gathered all my key people for a meal together. Ailey, Sarit, Ritter, Keelong, Mad, Kalen, and Yaman. We roasted a whole goat, and everyone ate well. They all flattered me in their own ways. I told them to speed up. I wanted out of this region fast. As a leader, I should have done these group meals more often. This was the first one in months, not great for bonding. A week of calm travel passed. Then on the 7th evening, someone from the Blade Society wanted to see me. A muscular man in a black hooded cloak introduced himself as Alred, a silver-ranked hunter. He'd been tracking a group of 5 to 8 vampires that had been circling our camp for several nights. The garlic kept them at bay, but he believed they planned to follow us all the way to Valor Domain. That worried me. Vampires could convert humans. If they established themselves in my territory's forests and hills, they'd multiply endlessly. Alred wanted 50 elite soldiers to help him hunt them down. I agreed, but demanded half the spoils. Then I called Keelong and gave him the mission. take his entire Iron Bear company and help the hunter. I told Keelong that if he did this well, I'd make him an honorary knight. His eyes lit up. I gave them until 9 the next morning. If they missed that deadline, they could catch up on the road. Next morning, 9 o'clock came and went. No Keelong. I frowned but ordered the march to continue. I wasn't waiting around. 2 more days, still nothing. Maybe they'd hit serious trouble, or maybe Keelong decided following me wasn't worth it and left. His name stayed in my troop roster though, so he was probably alive but stuck somewhere. On the bright side, there were 0 vampire incidents after they left. I gradually stopped thinking about them. The journey continued for over 2 weeks. I studied magic with Waynies, practiced swordsmanship with Ailey, and was close to leveling up again, planning to put the next point into Battle Fury to extend my lifespan. We passed through Long Forest Town briefly, buying goats, chickens, potatoes, and grain. Over the following days, we stopped at 7 or 8 towns for iron farming tools and a cartload of raw iron ingots. 3 nobles invited me to their castles. I declined every one. No socializing until I had an heir, that was my rule. Whenever I could, I secretly stored extra purchased grain in my inventory when no one was watching. Then on a bright, sunny afternoon, we finally arrived at Valor Domain. "We're back, my lord," Ailey said excitedly. Everyone was exhausted from over 3 months of travel. We'd only lost about a dozen slaves along the way, much better than expected. Matt had noticed that the boiled water policy dramatically reduced sickness, though he attributed it to some kind of magic rather than hygiene. I immediately called Yaman, my engineering specialist. His job now was critical: find the perfect location for building a castle and figure out where we'd set up our temporary camp. He saluted confidently. "Leave it to me, sir." I assigned Sarit with 10 light cavalry to escort and protect him during the scouting. The real work was about to begin. By evening, Yaman had picked a spot for our temporary camp. South was open plains, north had rolling hills, a river ran along the east, and thick forest stretched endlessly to the west. He recommended building the castle on a raised plateau nearby. Solid foundation, flat top, elevated dozens of meters above the surroundings for defense, with plenty of resources all around. I approved it, but told him to keep scouting the rest of Valor Domain for an even better location. 3,000 people started setting up camp around the plateau. Watching all that activity, I felt genuinely good. My start was strong thanks to Kylo's backing. I had enough slaves that I didn't need to worry about recruiting free citizens for years. Honestly, slaves were more profitable. Their entire output was mine. Free citizens paid taxes, but the crown took 20%, the church wanted a share, and only what remained was mine. For our first evening in Valor Domain, I ordered double rations for everyone. 10 goats were roasted, every soldier got a piece. Slave soldiers and technical slaves got small portions too. Farm slaves just got extra porridge and watched everyone else eat meat. But while I was gnawing a lamb leg, Ailey rushed over looking tense. Dog-headed beastmen had been spotted in the western forest, watching our camp. I'd almost forgotten. West Seas still had plenty of roaming beastmen. I told Ailey to eat first and sent Sarit to organize defenses. I also tasked Yaman with building a wooden fort the next day, using all available farm slaves and carpenters. No walls meant no sleep. Next morning the camp was already bustling at dawn. Farm slaves were fetching water and collecting firewood without being told. Most had smiles on their faces. Apparently, I was a generous master by their standards. Sarit reported the dogheads had harassed us all night, only retreating at dawn. I sent him to sleep and called Ritter. His loyalty had climbed above 90, usable now. I ordered him to take his forces to the forest edge for guard duty, killing any dogheads on sight. He had over 600 soldiers under him, 100 trained troops plus 500 servant soldiers, plus a dozen well-armored elite warriors from his father's company. On paper, he was the second strongest force in Valor Domain. But I wasn't worried. My own 200 slave soldiers plus 100 plus roster troops, all heavily upgraded, were far superior individually. My heavy infantry and cavalry were all high bronze warrior level. Even my light troops were mid to high warriors. Ritter's numbers were bigger, but my quality was untouchable. I called Kaylin over to put her in charge of all medical slaves. From now on, she'd handle healthcare for everyone, slaves, soldiers, and family alike. Waynies arrived with the Nightingale servants carrying breakfast. She tried a seductive voice she'd apparently learned from them. I laughed and told her she was the lady of the house. Dignity suited her better. She immediately switched to a mature, commanding tone. I just smiled. I invited Kaylin to eat with us. She stammered that she'd already eaten, clearly surprised and unsure how to handle the invitation. I slapped Kaylin on her generous backside when she lied about having already eaten. Breakfast wasn't even ready yet. She yelped, blushed crimson, and glanced nervously at Waynies. But Waynies just rolled her eyes and told her to sit down. Kaylin happily obeyed. The truth was, I needed Kaylin as more than just a medic. She was the perfect candidate for Chief Mage of Valor Domain, and I couldn't let that talent slip away. I was also struggling to keep up physically. Between Waynies and the two upper Nightingale slaves, I was spread thin. My stamina needed work. After Kaylin left, Waynies got pouty. I explained plainly. The Holland family needed children desperately. Legitimate sons, illegitimate sons, all welcome. Our family was dangerously thin. As the lady of the house, it was actually her responsibility to help me find women who could bear children. She'd received a proper education and understood noble families worked this way. She went quiet, then grudgingly agreed. Being a merchant's daughter, she didn't have the leverage to push back hard. Her brother Ritter's 600 troops were no match for my 100-plus elite guards, and everyone knew it. I kissed her and smoothed things over, then went to inspect the territory. Yaman had the farm slaves chopping trees in the forest. Mad was leading others to flatten ground and clear weeds for the camp. I noticed the ground clearing had too many workers, so I redirected some slaves under Mad to start plowing farmland instead, putting a heavy infantry veteran named Sild in charge of the construction site. Sild was my best spearman, mastery level at 91, but not smart enough for officer material yet. My best manager was Mad, followed by Yaman, then Kaylin and Sarit. Ailey was the strongest fighter, but only average intelligence. 3 days passed. Dogheads came harassing every night, but Ritter's forces killed dozens, quieting them down. There had to be a settlement nearby. I'd deal with it once we were established. The wooden fort was finished, triple-layered log walls, watchtowers every 50 meters, and 400 to 500 simple wooden houses inside. Farm slaves slept 5 or 6 to a room in tiny 8-square-meter cabins. My soldiers each got private quarters. My own house was a luxury wood building of 50 or 60 square meters, beautifully carved by the master carpenter. Mad had cleared over 3,000 acres of farmland southwest of the fort, not yet planted, but ready. At peak, he deployed over 1,000 slaves and 200 oxen. On the third morning, I woke up with Kaylin in my arms. She'd come to my bed willingly, barely needed any convincing. I told her I sensed she had magic talent and gave her the Earth Meditation Scroll to study. She couldn't read, so I'd teach her. She was happy but worried about Waynies. I told her Valor Domain was my domain, but I warned her to show proper respect to Waynies. The wife outranked the mistress. At breakfast, Ailey reported overnight incidents. Ghouls wandering near the western forest and jackalmen from the northern hills, driven off by Sarit's cavalry. Dogheads had finally stopped coming. I ordered Yaman to build a watchtower outpost on the northern hills with a garrison of 15 soldiers. If anything major happened, they'd signal with smoke. Things were falling into place. I invited Ailey to eat breakfast with me. Roast fish, white bread, wheat porridge, and butter. Over the meal, we discussed the Beastman problem. Too many were lurking around our territory. We needed to organize military sweeps, or the slaves couldn't farm safely. After suiting up in heavy armor, I gathered all my cavalry and rode out to inspect the territory. The farming operation looked great. Nearly 1,000 slaves and over 200 oxen working steadily, clearing about 2,000 acres per day. The soil was excellent, yellowish-black, producing mid to upper quality farmland. Some plots were even top grade. I noticed the fields were impressively well organized, neat rows, proper walking paths, everything planned out perfectly. I called Matt over and asked if he'd designed the layout. He admitted it wasn't him, but a slave named Charles who really knew farming. I had Charles and 4 other skilled farm slaves brought over. They were terrified, kneeling and shaking, probably expecting execution. Charles turned out to be about 40 years old with sharper eyes than a typical slave. He'd spent 2 years studying at an agricultural academy in the Lock Kingdom before being captured. Despite his knowledge, he'd only been classified as an upper farm slave. agricultural skills weren't valued like blacksmithing or carpentry. I immediately promoted all 5. No more field work. They'd serve under Mad as farming supervisors, with Charles leading. Double rations, meat once a month. Charles nearly cried with gratitude. I told Mad to keep clearing land, but start planting within 7 days. Missed the window, and we'd have no harvest next year. Then I rode north through the hilly terrain with my cavalry. The brush and scrub made horseback travel slow. From a ridge at noon, Ailey spotted over 100 dog heads to the northwest. I decided to leave them alone for now. We continued north toward Valor Domain's border. After 3 hours through natural valley passes between hills, we emerged onto another plain. It was nice land too. According to my map, this area was right at the boundary, technically belonging to the neighboring Green Plains domain. But the border was vague. The map wasn't detailed enough to draw a precise line, and the neighboring lord apparently hadn't arrived yet. No people, no markers, no presence at all. In cases like this, whoever occupied disputed land first got to keep it. Might made right. We took the easier river route home, arriving at camp by dusk. I started forming a plan. I'd assign Ritter to occupy that northern borderland, essentially claiming the southernmost portion of Green Plains domain. Without precise boundary markers or an opposing lord present, there was plenty of room to stretch our borders. Just had to avoid being too greedy. I couldn't spare my own troops for this. I needed them concentrated. But Ritter had enough soldiers, and his loyalty was now in the 90s. If he could hold that ground, it would give us valuable extra territory and put a buffer between our core settlement and whatever came from the north. Over dinner, roast chicken, fish, white bread, cheese, and wild vegetable soup, I discussed the border situation with Waynies. I told her about the unclaimed plain beyond our northern hills. The kingdom hadn't sent anyone to draw precise boundaries yet, so whoever planted people there first would keep it. She agreed we needed to move fast before the Green Plains Baron figured out the same thing. I proposed giving that borderland to Ritter as a fief. But then I realized I still needed his servant soldiers to guard our farmlands and watch the slaves. Waynies jumped in. She'd talk to her brother and get him to hand over troops. I settled on taking 300 of his 500 servant soldiers, leaving him enough to handle border pressure. That evening, the Nightingale slaves performed music and dances for entertainment. Around 10, I sent them away and spent the night with Waynies. She had to be getting pregnant soon with how often we'd been at it. Next morning, I studied heraldry, a required subject for nobles that I was far behind on. Around mid-morning, Ritter came to see me. He volunteered to give me 400 servant soldiers, saying he couldn't afford to feed them as a landless knight. Waynies had clearly talked to him, and he'd been even more generous than I asked. I accepted with a show of thoughtful hesitation, then told him to follow me. I had land for him. We rode north with all the cavalry, reaching the border area after a few hours. Still completely empty, not a soul in sight. I walked him around, marked boundaries in several directions, and granted him the whole disputed area. About 50 square kilometers, mostly plains with forest on the western edge. In the kingdom's interior, that was a full baron's worth of land. This is your knight's domain. Call it Windroom Village. Guard the border. That's your primary mission. Ritter's face turned red with joy. He dropped to one knee and pledged his loyalty passionately. A landed knight could create a surname and found a family, real nobility at last. His loyalty in my roster shot to a perfect 100. At this point, he was probably more loyal to me than to his own father. Ailey and Sarit looked envious, though Sarit was smart enough to realize this land came with problems. Border disputes were inevitable. I told Ritter to ask Kylil for support and build a fortress quickly. He needed to pick a family name and crest and report them to Waynies. I'd kept a strip of about 2,000 acres of riverside plain on the eastern edge as my direct territory. That river route connected straight to my core settlement and would need a fortified checkpoint someday. We returned after dark, fireflies drifting through the air. Waynies was waiting with dinner. She thanked me warmly for giving her brother the land. Then she mentioned something I'd overlooked. Some of my soldiers had been harassing female slaves. That was a problem. I decided each soldier would get temporary use of one female slave, with permanent ownership as a reward for future merit. Ailey and Sarit would get theirs outright. But my top men deserve proper wives, not just slaves. I asked Waynies to find merchant daughters or similar matches for Ailey, Sarit, Mad, and Yaman through her father's network. She said she'd write letters when the next trade caravan arrived. I woke at dawn feeling well-rested. No women last night. Went to bed early. I lay quietly thinking while Wayne slept, then got up when the sky brightened. After breakfast, I saw Ritter off. He had 100 trained soldiers, 100 servant soldiers, and about 15 armored elites. I gave him no farm slaves, but enough grain for 3 months. If the Green Plains Baron gave him too much trouble, I told him to come find me, and we'd beat the guy together. He rode off with his people, and 5 riders split south toward White Gull Port, probably heading to ask Kyle for support. Fine by me. The Windroom Trading Company was part of my power base. Then came the fun part, distributing women to my soldiers. I called Ailey, Sarit, Mad, and Yaman first. 2 women each, their pick. They were grateful. Clearly they'd been wanting this. Waynes had assembled all 500 fertile female slaves in rows outside the hall. After months of decent feeding, some had filled out nicely, with fair skin and pleasant figures. Not beauties like Waynes or the Nightingales, but perfectly fine for companionship and children. My 4 officers picked the 8 best-looking ones. Men's taste was remarkably consistent. The rest of my soldiers were buzzing with excitement. I teased them. They hadn't earned any real merit yet, so how could they deserve women? They went quiet. Then I offered a compromise. I'd lend each man 1 female slave. If they earned merit later, the loan became a gift. They roared with gratitude. To keep things fair and avoid jealousy, I made them all blindfold themselves and grab whichever woman they caught. Whether pretty or plain, that was their luck. They loved it. The whole thing turned into a chaotic, entertaining scramble. Afterward, I gave one warning. These women are loaned, not given. Anyone who damages his woman, I'll take his head. They scattered happily. Some had the discipline to wait until evening. Others closed their doors and got started immediately. Each soldier had a private wooden cabin, so at least there was privacy. The next day, I rode south with my cavalry to check the southern border. After 5 or 6 hours of easy riding across flat ground, we crossed a small river and continued to some low hills that marked the boundary with Fearless Domain to the south. That territory was smaller than mine, about 500 square kilometers, but almost entirely flat plains with excellent farming potential. Better than mine, honestly. Looking at all that open land stirred my greed. But this kingdom had rules. You couldn't just seize another lord's territory. There were only 3 legal paths to expansion: military merit rewards, inheritance through marriage, or land exchanges, limited to once per year with roughly equal value. All difficult, all slow. We spotted a small wooden fort in the distance, about 10 acres, 5 watchtowers, a flag with a family crest flying from one. The Fearless Domain Baron had arrived. I watched from far away, then turned back. I had no idea how many troops he had, so I decided to play it safe. I'd come back another day with more soldiers for a proper neighborly visit. I returned to camp at dusk. The land looked beautiful, golden sunset over thousands of acres of newly plowed fields, sheep grazing in fenced pastures. Hunting had proven difficult. Our archers could only catch small animals like wild chickens. But between my secret inventory stockpile, the cart-loaded grain, and next year's expected harvest, food wasn't a real concern. Yaman reported finding limestone in the northern hills, perfect for making lime, and he knew how to process it. One less problem to worry about. I spent the evening studying heraldry, which was painfully hard to memorize. Then Sarit announced that Keelong had arrived. I was surprised and suspicious. I had Ailey bring heavy infantry into the hall before letting him in. Keelong entered with 2 mercenaries carrying a long chest. He knelt and said he'd completed his mission and had treasures to present. They opened the chest, and it was impressive. Gold eagles, silver deer, foreign coins, gold nuggets, raw or even several gold nuggets. On top sat a blood-red leather book titled Book of Blood, and below it lay a crimson staff about 1.60 m long with a deep red gemstone. I called Waynes in. She gasped when she saw them. Book of Blood? Crimson staff? These belong to Viscount-level vampires. She explained both items contained vampire-only magic, unusable by others, though the materials had some value. Then she asked the critical question, were all the vampires killed? Because survivors would hunt relentlessly to recover these items. Keelong launched into a dramatic story about his adventure with Alred the Silver Hunter, claiming they'd foiled some vampire conspiracy. But the story was vague and theatrical. He never explained what the vampires were actually plotting. I couldn't make full sense of it. He'd lost over half his men, down to 31. Alred had apparently left to handle other contracts. Something felt wrong. I ordered all my soldiers to surround the hall. Then I told Keelong I needed to verify none of his men had been turned into vampires. His mercenaries saw my troops closing in and drew weapons defensively, backs together. But when they heard my explanation, they relaxed somewhat. Everyone eats a head of garlic, I said. Keelong didn't hesitate, grabbed a fistful and chewed it down. His men followed. Some choked from eating too fast, coughing and turning red, frantically explaining they'd just swallowed too quickly. My soldiers watched them with weapons ready. They all passed the garlic test, but that only ruled out low and mid-level vampires. Higher-level ones might not react to garlic at all. And there was another problem. Keelong's loyalty in my roster sat at 75. It had actually dropped. I didn't know why, and that made me deeply uneasy. I pulled out a silver deer coin and made each of Keelong's men hold it. Silver was supposed to burn vampires. They all passed, no reaction. But my suspicion didn't fade. Keelong's loyalty was stuck at 75 and hadn't dropped even after I'd openly distrusted him. That meant he'd had ulterior motives from the very start. My leadership skill couldn't increase loyalty for someone who was fundamentally hostile. Waynes offered to use her small supply of demon-purging holy water. One drop could expose any dark creature's disguise. I agreed, but sweetened the deal for Keelong. Pass the test, get knighted with land. Keelong's face turned red. He started shouting about loyalty and sacrifice and how I didn't trust him after he'd lost half his men for my mission. Ailey barked at him to shut up, and every weapon in the room pointed his way. I stayed calm. If you're not a vampire, why fear the holy water? One drop and you're a landed knight. He demanded to leave instead. That confirmed it. Waynes raised her staff and activated Guardian Aura, a golden shield covering everyone within 6 meters of her. Then something unexpected happened. One of Keelong's own men, a tall, strong swordsman, spoke up, urging his captain to just take the test. Other mercenaries agreed and started edging away from Keelong. His dream had always been nobility. Refusing this made no sense unless something was very wrong. Keelong snapped. His eyes turned bloodshot red, and in his desperation he pointed at his deputy, a man named Toma. You're a vampire too. Stop pretending, you idiot, Toma muttered. Now both of them were exposed, surrounded by their own men who'd backed away in horror. Sarit was already dipping arrowheads in holy water. Then Keelong's voice changed completely. Deeper, colder, eyes glowing blood red, face deathly white. He was being possessed remotely by a powerful vampire. The entity spoke through him, calling itself a vampire count. It offered a deal. Let someone carry away the Book of Blood and Crimson Staff, and it would leave my territory alone and infiltrate West Seas somewhere else. I was furious. All I wanted was to farm in peace, and now vampire politics? I thought for a moment, then waved my hand. Kill him. Sarit's arrow hit Keelong's leg. The flesh erupted in blue smoke where the holy water touched. Keelong screamed inhumanly. The mercenaries swarmed him, spears thrusting, swords hacking, warhammers crashing. Even with a gold warrior's body, he couldn't fight everyone. The tall swordsman was the one who finally took his head. What's your name? I asked him. Shelt, my lord, he said, kneeling. I ordered the remaining mercenaries tested with holy water. A soldier dripped it on each one. All human. Shelt then explained what had actually happened during their mission. They'd tracked the vampires to a mountain cave. The entrance was narrow, so only Keelong, Toma, and about a dozen men went inside with Alred the Silver Hunter. Only Keelong, Toma, and Alred walked back out. Everyone who went into that cave died, except the two who came back as vampires. The so-called Silver Hunter, Alred was almost certainly in on it, or had been turned himself. The treasure chest, the dramatic hero story, it was all a setup to get vampire agents close to me, along with the Book of Blood and Crimson Staff that the vampire count apparently wanted planted in my territory. From what the mercenaries told us, Keelong and his group clearly got ambushed in that cave. The Silver Hunter Alred had probably been turned into a vampire too. The whole thing was a trap. I drew my sword and offered Shelt, the man who'd beheaded Keelong, the title of honorary knight. He knelt and accepted eagerly. The other mercenaries watched with envy. Even an honorary title was better than the mercenary life. Steady pay, no wandering, higher status. I had Ailey arrange housing for them, while keeping them under quiet surveillance. The hall needed serious cleaning after all that blood. Back in the bedroom, I asked Waynies how dangerous these vampires really were. She said even a vampire count couldn't survive being swarmed by dozens of high warriors. They were probably targeting West Seas because the new territories were underdeveloped and the lords were weak, easy to infiltrate. I decided to send the Book of Blood and Crimson Staff to Marquis Val as a gift. Let him deal with the vampire problem. He had the military strength for it. Plus, those items were being tracked by the vampires, making them dangerous to keep. They were worth over 1,000 gold eagles, but I had no way to process the materials and no desire to have vampires hunting me over them. Sending them to the Marquis would earn me goodwill with my most important political patron. Wayne smiled and said it was a smart move. Next morning, I had Wayne's draft a letter to the Marquis describing how I destroyed a vampire nest and was presenting the captured items as tribute. She wrote it carefully, asking me about the proper tone and phrasing. I called Sheldon and gave him the mission. Take all 30 Iron Bear mercenaries on fast horses and deliver the chest to Marquis Val's camp, following the river road north. I gave him the sealed letter and a Holland family crest pin as credentials, plus spending money for the road. One more thing. I had Melon take some silver deer coins to the blacksmith and melt silver into 10 iron swords. Silver-laced blades against vampires. I told Shell to wait for 5 of those swords before departing. I also gave him a tactical tip. When leaving camp, display the Book of Blood and Crimson Staff openly on top of the chest. After a few miles, pack them inside. This way, any watching vampires would see the items leaving my territory and hopefully follow them toward the Marquis' army rather than staying near my farmlands. Shelt promised to complete the mission and left to prepare. Then the Nightingale slaves led a parade of maids carrying breakfast into the hall: roast chicken, fish, vegetable soup, white bread, butter, cheese, and spices. I asked them to call Waynies and Kalen to eat together. One of the upper Nightingales answered in that impossibly seductive voice and walked away, swaying her hips. I watched the whole way and shook my head. So hard to resist. Waynies and Kalen both came for breakfast, and they brought my mother Bala and sister Jenny. Mother got emotional, saying she'd never lived so well. Endless white bread every day. Jenny asked excitedly what we'd be eating. She was a little more reserved around me than the old Simon's memory suggested, but still sweet. I told her there'd be roast lamb and fish. Kalen reported she'd found some medicinal herbs nearby, blue mountain flowers and moss grass that could treat wounds when mixed. I reminded her to stay safe since beastmen were still roaming around. We all ate together. Everyone's table manners were terrible except Wayne's, and even she wouldn't pass at a proper noble dinner. I made a mental note to hire an etiquette teacher through Kyle's next trade caravan. After breakfast, I suited up and assembled a force of 80 personal guards and 100 trained slave soldiers, 180 men total, all mounted. That was probably more armored troops than most new barons in the area could field. We rode south, toward the border. When we reached the small river I'd crossed before, I nearly exploded with rage. Yesterday this had been empty wilderness. Now there was a small wooden fort with a watchtower flying the Fearless Domain Baron's flag. And this wasn't borderland. Checking my map, this position was clearly, undeniably inside Valor Domain. No ambiguity whatsoever. They'd grabbed nearly 100 square kilometers of my territory. Even I hadn't been this aggressive with the disputed northern border. I wanted to draw my sword and charge immediately, but I calmed down for a moment. Ask them who they are, I said coldly. Ailey rode forward and roared the question. A voice from inside called back that he was Knight Rick, serving Baron Hella of Fearless Domain, and claimed this was their territory. He told us to leave. That was it. I snapped. Kill them. I drew my sword and pointed forward. West Sea's governance framework was still being established. A freshly appointed knight in disputed territory? Kill him, and nobody would care. If it had been a baron, there might be consequences, but even then, dead men tell no tales. My soldiers charged with battle cries. Infantry raised shields in front, cavalry flanked wide, archers covered from behind. Well organized, far beyond a village brawl. The people inside the fort were terrified, mostly farmers who'd just put down their hoes. Their fort was a joke. Single-layer log walls that my heavy infantry kicked down with a few stomps. Their handful of archers, probably former hunters, had weak bows and cheap arrows that bounced off our shields. Our longbowmen picked them off in seconds. The walls collapsed. Screaming erupted. My soldiers poured in and cut down over half of them in moments. "Spare those who surrender," I said calmly. My guards shouted the order. 15 survivors dropped to their knees. Knight Rick was dragged out unharmed. He'd hidden toward the back. They threw him on the ground in front of my horse. "Why did Baron Hela invade my territory?" I asked the captured knight coldly. Rick stammered that it was a mistake. They'd misread the location. Sure they did. I pressed him for information. Baron Hela had only 37 soldiers total, and we'd just killed several. The Bach family was newly created nobility, also sponsored by Marquis Val. Hela's father had died protecting the Marquis too. But unlike me, Hela hadn't married a merchant's daughter. Instead, he'd arranged to wed the 6th daughter of the Maple Leaf Viscount up north. I almost laughed. No marriage contract signed yet, just a verbal agreement. This fool was walking straight into a trap. That Viscount would swallow his barony whole within a few years, and that would put a much stronger neighbor on my southern border. Not good. Rick revealed that the entire Bach family had come. Hela's 2 older brothers, 1 younger brother, 6 cousins, uncles, everyone with their families. Grand total, barely over 100 people trying to develop an entire barony. I told Rick to take me to his baron. I wanted compensation. We crossed the shallow river and rode for about 2 hours. The surviving prisoners would become my slaves. When we approached Hela's camp, alarm bells rang and farmers ran inside clutching their hoes. Melon rode beside me carrying our sun and moon banner. Rick was tied with a rope around his neck, dragged along by a heavy cavalryman. A deliberately humiliating display. Ailey bellowed our demands. 500 gold eagles and damages plus 100 for Rick's ransom. Pay up or we'd storm their walls and kill everyone. Inside, I could imagine the panic. Their fortifications were mediocre. Through Rick's information, I knew this was basically a large family with farming tools pretending to be a military force. Hela's uncle, a big, muscular former blacksmith, apparently climbed the watchtower wanting to fight, boasting about his warhammer. Then he actually looked at my army. 180 armored soldiers in proper formation, infantry with shields, flanking cavalry, archers in the rear. His bravado evaporated instantly. "There's so many of them," he muttered. The reality hit them all. They couldn't pay 500 gold eagles. Hela probably had 50 or 60 total. His advisor, an old man in a patched black robe who'd once worked as a tax collector for some baron, confirmed the demand was actually standard. The problem was they were simply too poor. 2 hours, or we attack. Ailey roared at the silent fort. I wasn't in a rush. Their walls were rough, but not something we could kick down easily. I sent Ailey to build siege equipment. In an hour, his men cut dozens of trees and assembled 2 simple battering rams with overhead covers to block arrows. Crude, but enough for this wooden fort. We ate black bread and water while waiting. Soldiers fed black beans to the war horses. Everyone checked their weapons. The deadline was approaching. Inside the fort, I could imagine the panic. They had no money to pay and no strength to fight. Then a white flag went up. A man in a patched black robe came out with a few farmers. His name was Ralt, apparently their advisor. He delivered an interesting proposal. Baron Hela was unmarried and wanted to form an alliance through marriage with my family. He'd even grant a family member of mine a landed knight's fief along the northern border of Fearless Domain. I almost laughed. This was clearly a scheme, probably planning to lure me inside and ambush me. But the marriage offer itself gave me ideas. In the Eagle Kingdom, marrying your daughter into another family gave the bride's family a weak claim over that territory. I played along cheerfully. Great idea. I agree. But I want a marriage certificate signed right now, not an engagement, a marriage document. I have a sister, Jenny Holland, age 10. I'll send her over in a few days for the ceremony. I had no intention of actually sending Jenny. This was a chess move. Ralt scurried back to report. He returned quickly. Hela agreed. Open the gates, I said. Then I quietly told Melon to keep the cavalry and slave soldiers outside, surrounding the fort. I walked in with my personal guards. The place looked like a bandit camp, sloppy, disorganized. Hela greeted me wearing his lord's crown, looking embarrassed. He didn't even know my name. I introduced myself curtly and told him to bring out parchment. No going inside. Bring a table out here. My soldiers immediately flooded in and seized every strategic position. Watchtower archers were replaced with my longbowmen. Hellas people turned white with fear. When Ralt went to fetch the parchment and seal, I sent 4 soldiers to follow him. Hellas' face twitched with anxiety, then deflated in defeat. Whatever trap they'd planned was clearly impossible now. Ralt returned with writing materials. I dictated the terms clearly, a marriage certificate, not an engagement, between Jenny Holland and Baron Hella of the Bach family. Right? Hella told Ralt nervously. Ralt picked up the quill and started writing. Ralt's handwriting was surprisingly neat. Literate commoners were rare in this kingdom. He finished the marriage certificate quickly. Hella looked it over, handed it back, and Ralt presented it to me through Ailey. I read it carefully, then said, "Seal it." I pulled my baron's seal from my pouch, actually from my inventory, signed my name, stamped the red ink, and pressed it onto the parchment. Hella did the same with his family's seal, a yellow wave shield on a red background. 2 noble houses, officially bound by marriage. No royal approval needed for this kind of document. I rolled up the certificate and stored it safely. This paper gave the Holland family a weak legal claim over Fearless Domain. That was the whole point. Then Hella invited me inside for a banquet, claiming he had some mysterious treasure to show me. His nervous smile screamed trap. But my soldiers already controlled every key position in his fort: watchtowers, gates, high ground. What could he possibly do? I declined the banquet but agreed to look at his treasure. He led the way toward a storeroom. We'd barely walked a few dozen steps when a crossbow bolt flew from a second-floor window of a tall building to my left. "Watch out, my lord," Ailey dove in front of me. I hit the ground rolling without even looking. The bolt struck Ailey's shoulder plate, but couldn't penetrate the chainmail underneath. Their crossbow was so old and worn it couldn't even punch through armor at close range. "Kill them all. No one survives," I roared. I couldn't believe it. This pathetic baron with farmers for soldiers actually attempted an assassination? With a rusty crossbow? My soldiers erupted like caged beasts. Ailey drew his greatsword and cut a militiaman clean in half. Arrows flew. Hellas' muscular blacksmith uncle took an arrow through the back that pierced his heart and exited his chest. He collapsed, blood foaming from his mouth. I was rushed out of the fort under heavy guard. Outside, I waved at the soldiers holding Rick the captured knight. A light infantryman's sword came down. Rick's head rolled across the ground, eyes still twitching before going still. The slaughter lasted 30 minutes. The Bach family ceased to exist. Ailey dragged Ralt back to me, the only survivor. He was shaking so badly he couldn't stand, begging to serve me. I sent him to verify every male member of the Bach family was dead. He confirmed they were. I looked at the marriage certificate one more time. This document gave me a weak claim to Fearless Domain. In this kingdom's succession law, if a lord dies without sons, brothers, uncles, or nephews, his wife's family could inherit, as long as they were nobility. With every Bach male dead and a marriage document linking our families, I had grounds to claim their territory. I needed to act carefully, though. Marquis Val's support would be crucial for making this work. Then I looked at Ralt kneeling there, pathetic and groveling. I glanced at Ailey and gave a slight nod. Ailey's sword flashed. Ralt's head dropped. No witnesses to the real story. A soldier brought me Hellas Baron's seal and Lord's crown. I pocketed both into my inventory. I gave clear orders. Burn all the bodies. Kill the prisoners captured at Rick's outpost too. No loose ends. And the official story was that bandits had wiped out the Bach family. We then killed the bandits and reclaimed the fort. Nobody speaks of the assassination attempt. By afternoon, every body was ash, scattered in the western forest for scavengers to finish. I shared some loot with my soldiers and headed home, leaving the fort intact. I'd station Schult's Iron Bear mercenaries there later as a placeholder. We made it back to our camp just as dinner was being prepared. I was back in time to eat, at least. But my mind was racing with plans. I needed a real castle, not just wooden walls. An earthen fortress first, then stone eventually. And I needed to visit Marquis Val soon to secure his backing for claiming Fearless Domain. I had mad roast dozens of wild chickens and rabbits to reward the troops. We'd also captured dozens of sheep and over 20 oxen from the Bach family. I'd slaughter a couple tomorrow for everyone. Cattle weren't particularly scarce in the kingdom. The northern grasslands produced plenty. At dinner, Waynes and I enjoyed roast deer leg and ribs with white bread and wild berries. Our hunting team had found a red deer herd and brought back 7 or 8. We'd eat well for days. Deer meat was excellent nourishment. I told Waynes I needed her tomorrow for a trip south to the former Bach territory. I wanted her to use Guardian Aura to cleanse any undead that might form from the bodies. She asked why I was interested in undead. I told her we'd wiped out a bandit camp, and I didn't want ghosts causing problems at night. She didn't need to know the truth about what really happened. She agreed without suspicion. Before bed, I checked my interface. Today's battle had given me a massive experience boost. Jumped straight to level 3. First time I'd gained that much at once. Killing and conquering was definitely the fastest path to leveling up. I saved my new upgrade point for later. Deer meat made me restless that night. Waynes paid the price. I was like a young bull. She didn't get to sleep until well past midnight. Next morning I was up early, practicing swordsmanship until I was drenched in sweat. Waynes dragged herself out of bed much later, exhausted from the night. Breakfast was more deer with yellowish white bread. We'd run out of the good store-bought flour. Our current bread was ground on-site and still had some grit. Not ideal, but nothing to complain about. Without the daily big meat portions, my diet wouldn't be much better than a middle-class family back home. I called Yaman over for an important assignment. He'd found limestone in the northern hills, perfect for making lime. I told him my plan: build rammed earth walls around what would become Valor Town, enclosing at least 400 acres, with proper defensive capability. This would be the foundation of our future castle. He asked how many workers he could have. 500 farm slaves, plus all the stonemasons, builders, and carpenters. And I had a secret to share. I leaned in close and told him to mix thick rye porridge, boiled down until you couldn't see individual grains, into the rammed earth along with the lime, sand, and clay he already knew how to combine. He looked at me like I was crazy, calling it a waste of grain. This was actually the sticky rice mortar technique from Chinese history. Ideally, you'd use glutinous rice, but this world didn't have any. Rye was the substitute. The key ingredient was amylopectin, a branch starch that acted as a binding and hardening agent. Done properly, the result would approach concrete strength and could last a century or two. Rye had less amylopectin than glutinous rice, but still enough to work. Yaman estimated 4 months with 500 slaves. I promised him another 500 after the farming rush ended, and told him I'd make him an honorary knight when the castle was finished. His eyes lit up. He'd always wanted nobility, but felt his fighting skills were too weak. Building me a fortress was his path. After arranging Yaman's construction task, I took Waynes, Sarit, and 180 soldiers south to the Bach family's ruined fort. She used her Guardian Aura staff, walking through the entire compound. 3 times we saw wisps of blue smoke rise with faint screams, newly forming undead being purged. Then she swept the surrounding area too, exhausting herself until sweat poured down her face. I felt a bit guilty watching her struggle, but it was worth it. The Bach family would never speak again. I carried her onto her white mare, and we headed home. I'd stationed Shelt here once he returned from delivering the vampire items to Marquis Val. The Fearless Domain inheritance could wait a year or so. Back at camp, things were livelier than usual. A merchant caravan had stopped nearby, a big one with noble flags, yellow deer on white background, belonging to Viscount Dason of Yellowstone Fort from the Western Territories. Ailey had already scouted them. They were selling slaves, salt, iron farming tools, and oxen. Their slave prices were several times higher than port rates. Upper farm slaves at 2 gold eagles, mid-level at 1. But that was fair considering they'd hauled everything across hundreds of miles of wilderness. Their security force was serious. Over 100 armored warriors and another 100 archers in leather. I rode over with my 200 soldiers. Their guards immediately formed defensive lines, but relaxed when we announced ourselves. I inspected their slaves, bought 200, 150 farm slaves plus stonemasons and builders, and took all their oxen. I also grabbed half their salt supply, which I'd almost forgotten about. Salt was critical. Without it, people lost strength and got sick. We hadn't found any salt sources in Valor Domain yet. The spending drained my visible coin purse considerably, though my secret inventory of dinar gold coins was still untouched. After the deals, I chatted with the caravan leader, Mike. Trading caravans were our main source of intelligence out here. He shared useful information. The barons to my south in Green Forest and Long Wind territories had also bought slaves, but spent less than half what I did. East across the river was Stonepile Domain under Baron Wyril. Then he dropped something interesting. The king was sending his third son, Prince Feti, to West Seas to command the Western Army, support Marquis Val against beast men, and oversee all royal territories and nobles in the region. A prince with direct authority over us would change the political landscape significantly. Mike seemed surprised I didn't already know about the prince. He gave me a suspicious look. What kind of noble doesn't know the royal family? I noticed, but didn't bother explaining. I just kept asking questions, and he kept answering. Since I was clearly wealthy, wore a lord's crown, and had an intimidating army at my back, I got plenty of useful intelligence from Mike the merchant and headed back satisfied. He was probably annoyed. I'd pumped him for information but gave almost nothing in return. I handed off the new purchases, farm slaves and oxen to Mad, stonemasons and builders to Yaman, Salt to Waynes. She and Kalen now managed the storehouses together, with Kalen also handling medical duties. I focused on overall strategy and military command. That evening, the soldiers who'd seen combat were in high spirits. Good food and excitement turned dinner into a bonfire celebration. Waynes and I watched from our room without joining. A lord should keep some mysterious distance. I asked her about the vampire count. She thought sending away the Book of Blood and Crimson Staff would likely make him lose interest. Without those items, even a vampire count would be significantly weakened, and we had enough strength to kill one. She mentioned several organizations that hunted dark creatures. The Blade Society was the strongest, but they'd clearly underestimated these vampires by only sending one silver hunter. Then she snuggled against me in that seductive way of hers, and I lost all interest in further questions. I picked her up and carried her to bed. We slept until late morning, both exhausted. She gulped down 2 full cups of water before she could even speak properly. After a massive breakfast, deer meat, bread, honey from a wild hive someone had found in the forest, I spent my new upgrade point on Battle Fury. Every point in this skill extended my lifespan. Around 13 or 14 total points would make me Bronze Knight level, with 150 years of life ahead. Magic could extend life too, but mages burned years casting spells, so knights usually outlive them. After the upgrade settled, I gathered 150 soldiers, all cavalry, 50 personal guards, and 100 slave troops on horses, and rode east toward the river. The river wasn't wide, maybe 20 meters across, narrower in spots. We found a shallow crossing and waded through. It would be easy to build a bridge here eventually, a job for Yaman. I'd wanted to visit Stonepile Domain on the other side. With a name like that, there had to be good building stone nearby. That was exactly what I needed for my future castle. The east bank of the river was flat and fertile, enough land for over 100,000 acres of farming. I wanted it badly, but the map drew the boundary clearly at the river. No room to stretch. We rode through the plains and into the hilly terrain of Stonepile Domain. The territory was about 700 or 800 square kilometers, mostly hills with only 20 or 30% flatland. Soon we found a settlement built against a hillside near water, flying a noble family's banner. Their fort was decent, not as refined as Yaman's designs, but clearly built by someone with military experience. So much for hoping for another easy target like the Bach family. Cavalry rode out to meet us. When they heard I was Baron Simon Holland of Valor Domain, they galloped back to report. Minutes later, a full force emerged, about 30 riders and over 200 infantry. Their equipment was mixed but respectable. About a third wore iron armor. I spotted roughly 100 slave soldiers with spears, plus what looked like mercenaries. This baron had real strength. "Hello, Baron Simon. I'm Baron Wyril of Stonepile Domain." A big man in yellow-trimmed plate and chain armor called out warmly. I smiled back. Neither of us wanted a fight. We dismounted and started chatting. Casual conversation, feeling each other out. Within minutes we were arm in arm, laughing like old friends. He was about 30, loud and friendly, always grinning. Internally I was thinking, this former commoner is pretty smooth. He had 5 landed knights, all decent warriors. He'd been generous with fiefs, which gathered strength quickly but might cause problems later. For now, though, it made him formidable. We sat between our 2 armies, eating roast beef and drinking together until evening. He killed a whole cow for the occasion and even fed my soldiers porridge. With full bellies, the tension between our troops melted away. Meanwhile, we were both quietly fishing for information. When I mentioned Uncle Jolin, Wyril's face lit up. His own father had been a fellow bodyguard of Marquis Val. Suddenly, we had a real connection. He pulled off his helmet, ordered his prized Blackthorn honey wine brought out, and the atmosphere shifted from diplomatic to genuinely warm. I matched his energy perfectly, calling him brother. He had solid territory and real military power, better as an ally than an enemy. I was disappointed I couldn't absorb his land, but having a strong neighbor on good terms was valuable. You can't play the power game alone. He even tried selling me granite from his territory. Brothers don't haggle. I agreed to buy some. My own domain had granite too, but it was hard to quarry. Pre-cut stone blocks from him would be useful, and trade would strengthen our relationship. With only a river between us and roughly equal strength, cooperation beat conflict for now. I got back to camp after dark, had some wheat porridge and salted deer meat, then headed to bed. Waynies was on her monthly cycle and sleeping in her own room, so Kaylin kept me company. She practically threw herself at me the moment I walked in. It had been several days since I'd touched her. No complaints from me. Next morning I asked about her magic studies. She still hadn't learned the earth meditation method, couldn't even read all the characters yet. I told her to ask Waynies for help and treat her like an older sister. She agreed awkwardly. She was actually 24, 5 years older than Waynies, and 8 years older than me. Though looking at my muscular frame, nobody would guess I was only 16. She reported few health issues among the slaves, some scrapes and a couple cases of diarrhea, nothing serious. At breakfast, Sarit brought troubling news. A group of jackal men had moved into the western forest. Slaves were too scared to go there for wood and wild fruit. Ailey was keeping watch with some soldiers. I wasn't too worried. Jackal men were tougher than dogheads, but still couldn't match a proper light infantryman one-on-one. Dogheads were even weaker, barely 5'3", easily handled by a single militiaman with a spear. Neither species had learned metalworking. They lived as primitive hunter-gatherers. Only their high birth rates and habit of hiding in forests and mountains kept them from being wiped out. The real threats in this world were strong orcs, centaurs, and trolls. Strong orcs could forge iron weapons, spoke their own language, and organized tribal alliances that could mobilize thousands of warriors, sometimes tens of thousands. Marquis Val had conquered West Seas by defeating one such alliance during an internal power struggle. Centaurs were even more advanced. They'd formed an actual feudal kingdom on the Cesari Sea, which was really a vast grassland northwest of the Sighing Wasteland. They were famous for their longbows but had limited numbers, maybe 150 to 200,000 total, and couldn't siege castles. Trolls lived in the far north among needle-leaf forests and tundra, though some roamed the Sighing Wasteland too. After breakfast, servants helped me into my knight plate armor. It was heavy. I was only at high warrior strength, which made full plate a bit of a strain, but I could still move freely enough. Sarit assembled 50 personal guards and 100 slave soldiers. That was most of my mobile force. The rest had to stay defending the camp. The servant soldiers were still too weak and undertrained for real combat. They drilled daily under veteran supervision, but weren't ready yet. We rode to the forest edge and linked up with Ailey. About 100 jackal men were lurking among the trees, some wearing old scavenged armor, most without. Their weapons looked decent though. Unlike the mindless mob we'd fought before, this group showed some intelligence. They weren't charging out blindly. "Can we talk to them?" I asked. Ailey shouted out, asking who their leader was. The forest erupted with barking, howling sounds, part dog, part fox. No coherent response. "Forget it. Prepare to attack," I said coldly. Ailey's eyes lit up. He started barking orders, organizing our troops into formations. 2 infantry squads flanking me, 2 more circling wide, slave soldier units advancing in formation. He moved through the ranks correcting positions, checking equipment, his voice booming commands. Each personal guard squad had 10 men, 1 heavy infantry leading 9 light infantry. Slave soldier squads were 25 spearmen each, sometimes mixed with shield and bow units. Depending on the situation, they'd be reorganized on the fly. Time to clear these pests from my forest. Ailey had the formations ready in minutes. He raised his sword and roared the charge. Our soldiers rushed forward in organized lines while the jackal men howled and wave their mismatched weapons, rusty swords, axes, hammers, curved blades, even farming hoes. I watched from horseback, flanked by heavy cavalry. The archers fired a volley. Then our infantry pushed into the forest. The slave soldiers held their shield wall and thrust spears in disciplined rhythm. 20-some jackalmen fell in the first exchange. Ailey led a flanking charge from the left, his men screaming war cries. These jackalmen were fierce, though. They charged right back without fear. Ailey swung his greatsword and split one armored jackalman clean in half, head to toe. Then he backhand slashed another's head clean off, laughing the whole time. That broke their spirit. They started running, whimpering like beaten dogs. Our soldiers chased them down, cutting through them like vegetables. Then a nearly 2-meter-tall jackalman in old iron armor charged at Ailey with an axe, moving like a leaping antelope. Ailey raised his sword, ready to meet it, but Sarit's armor-piercing arrow punched through its neck first. It crashed down, blood gushing, dead in seconds. Ailey shot Sarit an annoyed look and went hunting for more. I got excited and drew my sword. "Follow me." I spurred my horse into the trees. The forest was open enough for mounted combat. I caught up to a fleeing jackalman and slashed its back open. Then another. I split half its face off. I killed 7 or 8, and honestly started enjoying it. Like hunting or fishing. We'd killed over 100 and chased them miles deep. I called a halt. The survivors were too fast to catch. Then everything went wrong. A dog-headed creature with a staff popped out of a bush and pointed it at me. Fist-sized fireballs shot straight at me before I could react. I only managed a panicked scream before they slammed into my chest, blasting me off my horse. My guards went frantic. Heavy cavalry dismounted to check on me. Infantry formed a shield wall around my body. And then, barking erupted everywhere. Hundreds of dogheads surged from the trees. The jackalmen and dogheads had been working together, and the dogheads had a shaman. "Don't panic. Form defensive lines." Ailey grabbed our banner and started shouting orders, steady as a rock. Slave soldiers formed turtle formation. I sat up with help from my guards, head still spinning. "I'm fine. Hold the line," I yelled. Thank God for the night plate armor. Without it, those fireballs would have seriously hurt me, or killed me outright if I'd been unarmored. The plate absorbed the impact. Hearing my voice calmed the troops down. They locked shields just as the dogheads hit. The fighting was brutal but short. Dogheads were small and weak. Most fought barehanded without even cloth armor. We slaughtered 100 to 200 of them before the rest fled screaming into the deep forest. I didn't chase. We'd gotten careless pushing too deep. I couldn't even ride. My guards carried me out by my arms and legs back to our forward outpost. Sarit reported our losses. 7 light infantry wounded, 1 seriously with a gut wound, but saved by his chainmail. 17 slave soldiers wounded, 3 dead. 3 dead slave soldiers. At 6 gold eagles each, that stung. But combat meant casualties. There was no avoiding it. Unless you wore night plate armor like mine, 1 unlucky thrown axe could end you. I checked my armor. 3 black scorch marks on my left chest and waist where the fireballs hit. The plate had absorbed everything. Best money I ever spent. But I realized wearing the fanciest armor on the best horse made me an obvious target. I need to think about that. I told Ailey to hold the forest outpost, but not stay permanently. Once the beastmen calmed down, a small mixed unit could handle guard duty. These creatures weren't going away anytime soon. Marquis Val had driven off the strong orcs, but dogheads, jackalmen, and goatmen still infested every forest and mountain. This would be a years-long problem. Back home, I called for a hot bath. Waynies came over worried when she saw my scorched armor. I told the story with some enthusiasm, but she nearly cried, scolding me for charging personally. I was the family's only male. If I died, everything collapsed. She was right. I needed to let my knights handle the frontline fighting. She mentioned she couldn't cast fireballs, but knew a spell called Fire Spark. I filed that away. After bathing and napping, I had afternoon tea, white bread with honey and malt ale. The bread was noticeably better. Waynies explained the stonemasons had built proper grinding stones, producing much finer flour than before. That got me thinking about technology. What could I introduce from my old world's knowledge? Blast furnace steelmaking? Complete blank. I only knew the name. Water mills or windmills. Possible, but designing the mechanics would take serious experimentation. Brick kilns? Couldn't remember how to build one. I even knew how a bolt-action rifle worked. Every part was still clear in my head, but current manufacturing couldn't produce reliable metal components. An exploding barrel would be a stupid way to die, and I didn't even know if gunpowder's formula worked in this world. I wasn't an engineering student. My technical knowledge was shallow hobby stuff from random videos. I'm useless, I thought glumly. Wayne suggested we go look at the farmland. That triggered something. The curved shaft plow. I jumped up so fast she flinched. I remembered the design, an improvement over the straight plows everyone used here. I could recall about 80% of the structure. Some parts were fuzzy, but the main framework was solid. I rushed out and had Melon fetch all the carpenters and blacksmiths. Wayne's brought parchment and a quill. While waiting, I squatted on the ground scratching out diagrams with pebbles, reconstructing the plow from memory. When the craftsmen arrived and knelt, I told them to stand and gather around. I want to design a new type of plow. Come look at this. Finally, something useful from my old world that I could actually build. The craftsmen were surprised their lord cared about farming tools, but they gathered around eagerly, hoping for at least a piece of deer meat as reward. By sunset, we'd completed the curved plow design on parchment. My old art school sketching skills helped with the drawings. The carpenters and blacksmiths were genuinely talented. Each one contributed ideas that filled in the gaps in my memory. Together we perfected something I could only partially remember alone. With all my craftsmen working together, they could produce about 30 plows per day. Fitting these to our oxen would noticeably boost plowing speed. Not a revolutionary change, but a real improvement in productivity. I was genuinely happy. I rewarded the soldiers from today's battle with 5 slaughtered sheep, distributed by rank. The 6th sheep went to the craftsmen. They bowed and thanked me. And, holy God, that phrase made me frown slightly. The Holy Church had been crushed by the nobility about a century ago, losing their right to maintain armies. They'd become basically a decorative institution. But almost everyone still worshipped the Holy God, making the church a useful governance tool as long as they didn't overstep. The church officials assigned to my territory hadn't arrived yet. I'd deal with that later. Over dinner, deer meat, lamb chops, white bread, honey wheat porridge. Wayne's checked the food for poison before we ate. She cast her detection spell right at the table since she didn't recognize the servant who brought it. Smart woman. She offered to teach me the spell, but it required full mage-level ability and took a long time to learn. I studied heraldry after dinner with Wayne's sitting on my lap reading along. We went to bed early without any late-night activities. Next morning I woke refreshed and visited the workshop. The craftsmen had worked through the night and produced 18 curved plows. Impressive. I promoted the master carpenter Cairo as head of all woodworkers and the top blacksmith Telf as head of all smiths, both getting extra food rations as perks. I asked Telf about armor production. With all smiths working together, a heavy-scale armor set took 3 months, light brigandine 20 days, single-layer chain mail 1 month, double-layer 2 months. At that rate, it would take 10 years just to equip all my slave soldiers in basic armor. I kicked myself for not buying more blacksmiths at the slave port. For now, I told them to focus on farming tools and spare weapons, swords, spearheads, and arrowheads. Weapons were consumables that broke constantly in battle. Matt arrived with Charles and the farming supervisors. I sent them to test the new plows. They hitched oxen and started working the fields while I watched. Right then, a crystal-clear chime rang in my head. I opened my interface. Level 4. Creating and implementing the curved plow had earned me 5,000 experience in one shot. Next level needed 8,000. Farming innovation apparently counted as major experience. Good to know. I put my new upgrade point into magic, bringing it to level 2. I wouldn't be charging into battle anytime soon, so Battle Fury could wait. But stronger magic might push me to entry-level mage status, opening up useful spells. A cool wave washed through my head. My magical power surged, at least double what it was before. The upgrade seemed to boost raw magical energy and slightly improve talent, but it didn't automatically teach me new spells. I'd still have to learn those the hard way. Charles tested the curved plow and ran back beaming. Master, this is so much better than the straight plow. Easier to control and saves energy. I told him to just call it the curved plow. The carpenters and blacksmiths got orders to drop everything else and mass-produce them. I stopped by the medical hut looking for Kaylin, but she wasn't there. I found her outside playing some jumping game with my little sister Jenny, both laughing like flowers in bloom. I watched for a moment without disturbing them, then headed to the main hall. Waynies was reading when I walked in. I mentioned my magic felt stronger and asked how mage levels were measured. She said I was probably still apprentice level. To reach entry level, I needed to master at least one entry grade spell. She knew 3, Guardian Aura, Light, and Poison Detection. She hadn't managed to learn Fireball yet. She listed all her spells for me. Apprentice level, Illumination, Mage Hand, Fire Spark, Fear, Calm, Silence, and Healing. Entry level, Poison Detection, Light, Fireball, and Guardian Aura. Not a huge arsenal. Only Fire Spark and Fireball could deal direct damage. The others were support spells, though Light and Guardian Aura were excellent against dark creatures. I'd learned Mage Hand, Illumination, Calm, and Silence so far, all easy apprentice spells. Mage Hand had the most potential. If I could inscribe its rune in my spirit sea, it would work like telekinesis, growing stronger as my magical power increased. A white robe mage could supposedly lift themselves and fly using it. Waynies told me the Nature's Hand Mage Association sold spell scrolls. Apprentice spells cost 50 to 300 gold eagles. Entry-level ones ran 2 to 600. Intermediate spells were over 1,000. Magic required both talent and money. Then she surprised me by suggesting life potions to accelerate my night breathing technique training. The Royal Mage Corps and Winterford Academy sold them for 1,000 gold eagles per bottle. Nature's Hand charged 800 for a slightly weaker version. All were safe. Worst case, you'd just feel weak for a few months. I told her I didn't need them. I'd already awakened as a knight. Her jaw dropped. She looked me up and down in disbelief, then laughed and called my talent remarkable. She said I could still use life potions to speed up my advancement later, since many nobles never reached high knight level through training alone. I mentioned I should share the raiding fire-breathing technique with Ailey, Sarit, and her brother Ritter. Then she hesitated and asked something unexpected. Would I accept her father Kyle as my knight? I was surprised. She explained it wasn't his idea. He was too proud, always dreaming of earning a barony himself. He'd led his mercenaries into battle alongside Marquis Val, lost half his elite fighters, but only received some gold coins as reward. Never even got a meeting with the Marquis. Now he was past 40. In a few years his body would start declining. She worried whether he still had time to train as a knight. I thought about Waynies' request regarding her father. Getting a noble title through military merit required both strength and luck. During Marquis Val's campaign, at least a third of the army was mercenaries. Almost none of those mercenary captains got titles. The ones who did were mostly nobles' younger sons or personal guards like Uncle Jolin, men who'd served loyally for years and risked their lives. I told Waynies that if Kyle was willing to serve under me and follow orders, he was welcome. I had some concerns. He was used to being his own boss, and his ambitions were obvious. Too many Windroom Trading Company people in my territory could cause problems later. But right now, during this early building phase, I needed every bit of strength I could gather. Better to worry about internal politics once I'd survived the external threats. West Seas was still lawless enough that a baron could be wiped out with nobody noticing, just like what happened to Hela. Waynies thanked me happily. I changed the subject and asked her to teach me healing magic. Over the next few days, I studied magic intensively with Waynies and taught Kalen magical script on the side. I finally managed to learn healing. The casting had a clunky build-up, but the effect was surprisingly strong, matching Waynies' own results. I healed all the wounded soldiers in under an hour, using about half my magical energy. The troops were deeply moved. I waved it off and rode out to inspect the farmland. The fields were impressive now. Over 1,000 slaves and 400 oxen clearing 2,000 to 3,000 acres daily. Nearly 20,000 acres of good farmland ready for planting. I thought carefully about what to grow. Rye was essential, awful taste, but 500 gene per acre, sometimes 700 on rich soil. It fed the kingdom's working class. Barley tasted better and yielded 200 to 300 gene per acre. Wheat was delicious, but only produced about 100 gene per acre. No rice existed in this kingdom, no millet either. Potatoes, black beans, and horse beans provided variety. I called Matt and Charles over to discuss the planting plan. Then I laid out my vision for organizing the farmland. I divided the 20,000 acres into 15 estates, each worked by one team of about 110 slaves with roughly 27 oxen. Each estate would be named simply First Estate through 15th Estate. Every estate's living quarters would be built to military camp standards. I'd noticed Charles had already left open spaces between field sections for exactly this purpose. The man had been planning ahead without being told. Smart. I rewarded him with a roast chicken for dinner. I appointed Charles as Chief Agricultural Officer, overseeing all farming operations across every estate. If fields went untended or yields dropped badly, he'd answer for it. He could pick 10 assistants from among the slaves, all excused from field labor to focus on management. Within each estate, I set up a chain of command. Every 10 slaves formed a squad with a squad leader. 10 squads made one estate, managed by a chief. If one person in a squad made a mistake, the whole squad got punished. If one person escaped, the entire squad would be executed. Charles didn't fully grasp every detail, but he understood the important part. He'd been promoted. He dropped to his knees in gratitude. I told them not to worry about the details yet, just start planting. The management system I'd laid out was basically the old mutual responsibility method, squads of 10 watching each other, group punishment for individual mistakes. Every student back in China knew this stuff, but here it was secret knowledge only taught to noble heirs. Matt asked what each estate should grow. I turned to Charles. He was the expert. He rattled off recommendations without hesitation. Wheat near the river where soil was richest, barley further west, rye on the outermost fields since it grew anywhere. Potatoes in certain patches, black beans and horse beans where there used to be thick brush. A vegetable garden northeast by the river. Carrots, cauliflower, garlic, onions, beets. The northwest strip near the forest had long grass, good for grazing livestock. The man genuinely knew his stuff. I promoted his meals to longbow archer standard and hinted that if he kept performing well, I might give him a female slave for continuing his bloodline. He dropped to his knees crying with gratitude. I told him to have a planting plan ready by evening. Then I rode north to check on the castle construction. Yaman had his crews pounding rammed earth into wooden molds, gray-white blocks made from his special mix of lime, clay, sand, regular soil, and rye porridge paste. He'd tested my recipe and confirmed it really did make the blocks harder and more weather-resistant. They'd completed about 15 meters of wall so far, over 6 meters tall, 3 meters thick. The design was practical. Solid wall up to 5 meters, then a narrower defensive section above with a 2-meter walkway, plus observation and arrow slots. Nothing fancy, but sturdy and functional. I told him not to skimp on the rye paste. A good wall mattered more than saving grain. He promised to deliver. Back at the hall, I practiced fire spark while Wayne's read heraldry. By evening, Matt and Charles returned with their planting report. I made the final decisions. 3 riverside estates for wheat, with one also growing vegetables, carrots, garlic, cauliflower, and water spinach. Half the remaining estates got rye, most of the rest got barley. Black beans and horse beans shared portions of one estate. One full estate was dedicated to potatoes. I also set aside a few dozen acres for grapes and hops, cash crops for the future. Using seed grain emptied our temporary storehouse noticeably. After dinner, I snuck over and quietly moved some rye from my game inventory into the stores. Not too much, just enough that the guards watching the warehouse wouldn't notice the difference. A few days passed. Light rain came and moistened the soil perfectly. The slaves were planting steadily, about half finished. I was strolling through the fields with my guards, feeling content, completely unaware that strangers were approaching in the distance. The alarm bell rang from the watchtower. Farm slaves grabbed their hoes and ran toward the fort. I jumped on my horse and raced back with my guards. First time dealing with a real alert, and I'll admit my heart was pounding. The watchtower soldier reported a group crossing the river from the east, Stone Pile, Domain's direction. Was it Wiral's people? Sarit had 114 guards assembled. Ailey gathered 100 slave soldiers and 200 servant soldiers. That was everything inside the fort. The rest were spread across 4 outposts. West at the forest, north along the river road toward Ritter's territory, 1 in. The hills guarding a valley pass, and south at the Fearless Domain border. The east side had no outposts since the river, and the fort's proximity covered it. I climbed the watchtower and spotted a group of black dots in the distance. Several dozen people, definitely under 100. Manageable. I led over 300 troops out to meet them. They turned out to be mercenaries, not Wiral's men, about 80 fighters with mixed equipment. Their leader was a big man in heavy-scale armor leaning on a long-handled battle axe. He introduced himself as O'Duff, captain of the Iron Axe Mercenary Company, 11 heavy infantry, 37 axemen, 11 sword and shield fighters, 6 archers, and 12 spearmen. He was looking for work. The monthly price was standard, 5 silver deer for heavy infantry, for silver sheep for axemen, and so on. Roughly 3 to 4 gold eagles per month total, or about 40 to 50 per year. That sounds small, but one of my slave estates growing nothing but rye only earned about 20 gold eagles annually. It would take 1.5 estates just to support this one mercenary group. I checked his credentials, a sheepskin charter stamped by the Earl of Yellow Earth City in the Western Siege region. Looked legitimate. Registered mercenary companies at least cared about their reputation. I asked why he'd come from Stonepile Domain. He said he'd heard Wiral was recruiting mercenaries and offering landed knight titles to 5 captains. He'd rushed over but arrived too late. All positions filled. He was visibly heartbroken about missing what he called a once-in-a-century opportunity. Then he looked at me with hopeful eyes. I smiled. That was interesting news about Wiral. 5 new landed knights meant he was building power aggressively. I filed that away. I told O'Duff that if he pledged loyalty, I'd make him an honorary knight. Earning actual land would depend on his performance. I reminded him that my uncle Jolan served Marquis Val for 17 years and died protecting him. That's what it took to earn our family's barony. He was briefly disappointed, but quickly recovered. I'll serve you, Baron. He walked forward, raised his axe overhead, and knelt. I drew my steel sword and laid it on his shoulder, reciting the knighting oath. He shouted his pledge with genuine conviction, rough voice, brown beard, but something shrewd behind those eyes. His first mission, take the Iron Axe Company into the Western Forest and hunt dogheads and jackalmen. Monthly quota, at least 100 killed or captured. An honorary knight still needed a salary from the Lord. Without it, they had no income at all. Practically speaking, it wasn't much different from hiring mercenaries. But the title added a layer of loyalty and the promise of future reward. Men with something to aspire to worked harder and stuck around longer than pure hired swords. O'Duff shouted his loyalty pledge like a man possessed, face red with excitement. I just smiled, climbed on my horse, and rode away. Good energy, but I need time to see if he was genuine. I told Sarit to find the Iron Axe Company a spot near the Western Forest to build their own camp. No free food. They'd buy grain from us at normal prices. Let them do the dangerous work of clearing beastmen from the forest. If mercenaries died, it wouldn't cost me anything. Their river crossing also reminded me I needed an eastern outpost. I sent Ailey to pick a good spot along the riverbank, not to block every crossing, but at least to light smoke signals as an early warning. Over the next few days, the slaves finished planting all the fields, but I didn't let them rest. I pulled everyone who wasn't needed for weeding and watering, and had them build the 15 estate camps. With so many hands, all 15 were finished in just days. Wooden walls, houses, watchtowers, kitchens, storerooms, latrines. Small but complete. Then came the real organizational work. I personally divided slaves into 15 teams, assigning upper and middle grade slaves according to each estate's soil quality. I tested candidates and appointed squad leaders and estate chiefs myself. People who could both farm well and command respect. Too gentle wouldn't work. They needed some backbone. I split 300 servant soldiers across the estates for security, more on outer-facing ones, fewer on inner ones. Each estate got military squad leaders who reported directly to me, not the farm chiefs. They watched the chiefs while staying out of agricultural decisions. I also set up a rotation system so servant soldiers regularly moved between estates, preventing them from forming local alliances. After a week of organizing, the estates were running. Slaves moved out of the main fort into their assigned camps. Then I redirected all spare labor to Yaman's wall construction project. The workforce doubled overnight. Watching them work, I smiled, until I noticed some slaves were faking effort. Lots of movement, zero productivity. Classic freeloaders in a communal work system. I called Yaman over and taught him task-based management. Divide workers into small groups with group leaders. Assign each group a specific section with a deadline. Can't finish on time. No dinner. Set the workload right at the limit of what hard effort could accomplish. Not impossible, but no room for slacking. Let the groups police themselves. It worked immediately. Within hours, every slacker had vanished. Their own teammates made sure of that. Nobody wanted to go hungry because one person was lazy. After several hours of inspection, I headed back satisfied. Then another idea hit me. I called for the smelting slaves, about a dozen, led by an upper-grade smelter named Crod. They could melt and cast copper, silver, gold, and bronze into coins or other shapes. Not iron, though. They couldn't reach the temperatures needed. I sent Spring Orchid to fetch a wooden chest from my room. She swayed away in that distracting way of hers, and every male slave in sight lost focus for a moment. Honestly, these Nightingale slaves were my most trustworthy servants. They couldn't bear children, were physically delicate, and completely dependent on me for survival. They had no reason to betray me and every reason to be loyal.